Chapter 301. The windmill spun and spun. The wheels rolled and rolled. The walls of the Greycoat Army's encampment grew taller and taller. Things like watchtowers, bases for city defense equipment, and so on appeared one after another. If the previous city looked like a giant beast, then the current project was to put hair on this clean and slippery guy. If this step was completed, then the next step was to go to the surrounding passes to build checkpoints and finally connect them together to form an outer defense circle. And this could be called putting claws on the giant beast. Tangen's recent life was very regular and leisurely. There were two main things that he did. In the morning, he took David and the others to train the elite soldiers. In the afternoon, he took David and the others to receive Zophan's training. Well, this kind of behavior, from a professional point of view, was both offensive and defensive. Cough, cough. Let's start with the soldiers. When they gathered the next day, not a single one of them was missing. Even the young man who said he wanted to quit and was beaten up by Tangen came. To be honest, Tangen wouldn't train them for too long. At most, it would be a few months. It was hard to say what kind of results they could achieve. But because of this, the training entered a high-intensity rhythm from the beginning. Titan and the others had to train with the gray space every morning. They had to cross country with weights, dive in ice water, and climb with their bare hands. David and the others were already used to it, so it was very easy for them to do it. Even little Carol, who joined the training later, passed it easily. But it was different for Titan and the others. When had they ever experienced this kind of purgatory? So the first week of adapting was worse than death. And what accompanied them was endless ridicule and insults, as well as the pain and humiliation of being easily defeated by the gray space. Even so, they couldn't refuse to accept it, because the members of the gray space were stronger than them in terms of training intensity and other aspects, especially when a soldier angrily issued a challenge, but was defeated by little Carol with a sickle. Shame, a shame that they couldn't bear to look at. But no matter how tough the training was, none of the soldiers said they wanted to quit. They all gritted their teeth and bitterly endured. Even in the afternoon, when there was no supervision, they still trained crazily. One of the reasons for this was that they could feel their own improvement. This improvement was not only in terms of strength, but also in terms of flexible battle tactics. It had to be said that they were now imperceptibly influenced by the wretched thinking of the gray space. Of course, in addition to this, there was another more important reason. Their attitude was not for anything else, but to be able to abuse the gray space when their training was completed. Even if there were only 5 of them, it was still an achievement to be proud of. Yes, their current target was the 5 of them. Although saying this seemed very unambitious, it sounded even more weak. However, after coming into contact with it, they had to admit that the gray space did have the right to be arrogant. The difference didn't exist just because you didn't want to acknowledge it. Not to mention other things, the intensity of the training wasn't something that any army could compare to. As for their resentment towards Tangen, they had completely given up. This was simply a freak. They secretly suspected that if they were placed in the same field as Tangen, they would not last more than 10 minutes. The person who came out must be Tangen, who was clapping his hands and looking indifferent. As for Zophan's training, it seemed much more peaceful and relaxed. At least, it was like this for him and Tangen. Every time Zophan came, he would casually put down a light golden veil and then sit to the side to carve a statue. It could be seen that he was in a good mood recently. He answered almost all of Tangen's questions about fighting energy. However, David and the others didn't think this way. Although there was no physical exertion, they were enduring inhuman torment at almost every moment. The feeling of being pricked by needles was one thing, but the key was that Zophan only focused on explosive power training. After the light golden veil was shaken off, the next training was 3 stages of explosive power, 5 stages of explosive power. Of course, fighting energy wasn't limitless. Once it was used up, it would dry up. But now, in order to resist the pain of being pricked by needles, they had no choice but to squeeze out fighting energy from their bodies again and again. Then, they would accumulate it and finally erupt it. Then, they would squeeze it out. It felt as if a large hand had appeared in their bodies and tightly grasped their flesh and organs, as if it was grasping soft seaweed. Clenching it tightly, drops of fighting energy flowed out. Exerting force again, drops of fighting energy. But the key point was that these were internal organs, not seaweed. Every time they were plundered, their bodies would turn upside down and they would feel like vomiting. However, although the process was painful, the effects were significant. On the third day, David roared and shook off the light golden veil. At the same time, his strength also jumped from peak beginner level to beginner level intermediate level. David's breakthrough seemed to have stimulated the others. In the next few days, excited roars could be heard continuously due to the breakthrough in fighting energy. Seeing this, Tang was ecstatic. The combat techniques of the Gray Space members had already reached a certain level. Now that they had the support of stronger fighting energy, they were naturally like tigers that had grown wings. At the same time, he was calculating in his heart. It had only been a few days, and he had already advanced a level. In a few months. Waha! However, Tangen's excitement didn't last long. Zhuofan poured cold water on him. The reason why David and the others could break through so quickly was because they had already reached the critical point. Zhuofan's explosive force training had only brought this time forward. However, although he denied the idea of leveling up quickly, Zhuofan admitted that David and the others' cultivation speed should be faster than normal people. The reason was naturally because of the devil training outside their bodies. Although he was forced back to reality, Tang wasn't too dispirited. This was because he still had the fighting energy circulation channel. This meant that David and the others' cultivation speed would be much faster. So, what was there to be dissatisfied about? The city's promotion plan had also been launched. However, this time, Tang didn't follow Josiah around. She was now considered a leader, so she could make decisions. There were some specific matters that didn't require her to charge and break through enemy lines. Moreover, she wasn't the only person in charge of this plan. Josiah's main job now was to establish a secret organization, so there wasn't much of a problem in terms of security. Everything was unfolding in an orderly manner. Advancing, in this unnoticed mountain range, a rebel group called the Gray Coat Army was trying its best to expand its influence like an octopus. Perhaps its body was still small, but it was ready to attack. All right, let's temporarily move the camera away from the leisurely Tang and cross countless mountains, rivers, and lakes north, all the way north. The sky was dark, and the wind and snow were howling. Palm-sized snowflakes swirled down, covering everything. There was a steep slope with a slight curve, and the muddy ground was like a spotted dog. Bodies that were still warm were lying on the ground, and the snow melted as soon as it fell. Their armor was broken, and their faces were ferocious and stiff, frozen in the action of killing or being killed when they were alive. He raised his gaze and looked down. The black and gray city walls were riddled with holes, and the steep mountains on both sides extended to an unknown distance. It was obvious that this was a checkpoint in the mountains that was about to be conquered. The fierce battle on the city walls was coming to an end. The soldiers wearing the brand's standard armor retreated as they fought. Finally, they curled up in a corner of the city walls. There weren't many of them, and each of them was more or less injured. They roared loudly and waved their weapons, and their faces were covered with the determination to die. The people who were looking for openings to attack were a group of people wearing simple animal skins and waving heavy swords. They could be called barbarians. Their hair was disheveled, their eyes were blood red, and their exposed muscles were full of crisscrossing scars. This name was well-deserved. Of course, they had a formal name among the brand citizens. They were barbarians, the barbarians of the northern wilderness. Kill, kill, kill. Every time the barbarians attacked without fear of death, they would pull out a few soldiers from the battlefield and kill them with their swords. Blood splashed everywhere. Some of it splashed on the barbarians' messy hair and faces, but most of it gathered into a trickle and slid down the city walls. There were many barbarians in the northern wilderness, on the walls and under the walls. It was obvious that this small group of brand soldiers would die without a doubt. Glory, glory, glory. The one who was protected in the middle by the brand soldiers looked like a general. He raised his sword with his uninjured left hand and shouted at the top of his lungs. The surrounding soldiers immediately raised their spirits and waved their weapons. They opened their mouths and shouted, "Glory is my life. Sacrifice is eternal life." Their voices were hoarse and resolute, as if they were coming from the fault of the Gobi Desert. Although there were only a few dozen of them, their roars were forcefully powerful and solemn, shaking the sky. Then, a tattered flag was raised. The flag, which looked like a tiger or a lion, roared angrily in the wind and snow and pierced into the dark sky. Oh, so it's the Thunderbolt's army. At the foot of the hill, an old man with white hair and a big leaf dragon scale armor was sitting on the back of a horse. His tone was very calm, as if he saw a dish being served to him during a meal. Oh, so it's XX dish. Right at this moment, 3 long bugle horns sounded. The barbarians on the wall stopped attacking, and then roared unwillingly and retreated. The old man at the foot of the hill frowned and turned his head to look at the right side of the wall. There, a metal pipe that was fixed to the base was changing its direction. Then it slowly descended and pointed at the flag. Woo! The barbarians on the wall raised their weapons and shouted excitedly to the sky. It seemed that they were looking forward to the next scene. Thor's hammer, the old man murmured. Boom! Waves of air rolled, and stone bricks flew everywhere. A corner of the wall collapsed, and the falling snowflakes were also swept to one side. At the same time, the fluttering flag and the soldiers below were naturally swept away. There was no trace of them. The cheers became louder. The old man's face was a little ugly. His hand holding the reins also tightened. Then he narrowed his eyes and returned to his calm state. Marshal, it should be Tu's doing. A middle-aged man who was also wearing armor rode forward and whispered. The old man snorted, I know, Humph. No one else has the guts. The Thor's hammer could be found in every checkpoint town in a dangerous terrain, so it was very common. However, the explosive crystals inside were relatively rare. These things were too easy to destroy. It was very difficult to get a few pieces, even if you occupied a city. The Thor's hammer, just now, was obviously occupied before it could be used. That was why there was an explosive crystal inside. This kind of important military equipment was actually used to attack a group of defeated soldiers. As the marshal, the old man was naturally angry. However, this Tu seemed to be a person with a sensitive identity. The old man did not have any intention of stopping him. Forget it, let's go in. The old man waved his hand, continued to push forward. We will take down 3 checkpoints today. Yes. The middle-aged man bowed and turned his horse around to issue the order. The old man exhaled a breath of white air and looked towards the northwest. I am coming again. This time you can't stop me. The soft sigh did not travel far before it was drowned out by the howling wind and snow. At the same time, the cold corpses on the ground were gradually drowned out. To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 302. Hi. Tang In, so you're here. You made me look for you. Looking for me? Yes. I have to thank you for this matter. I won't say anything else. Here, I brought you 2 bottles of good wine. Oh, the key is your own strength. I just recommended you. TSK. But speaking of which, you didn't embezzle when you just took office, did you? Haha, I'm just kidding. Tang In laughed and took a bottle of wine from the speechless Fei Rue. He opened it and said, Drink. Why are you looking at me like that? You're kidding. Fei Rue laughed bitterly and took off the oilcloth seal. He explained before drinking. This is my father's treasure. I stole 2 bottles today. Oh. Tang In took a sip and swallowed thoughtfully. So your father embezzled. Puffed. Cough, 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 cough. It had to be said that when Tang In's bad taste flared up, ordinary people would not be able to withstand it. The cold wind was biting cold, and the warm sun shone. The weather had been like this for the past few days. The temperature seemed to be warming up. There was no doubt that this was spring in the Shirwan Mountains. Tang Yin and Fei Rui were now on an unknown hill outside the southern city gate. The sprouting grass under them formed a green carpet, and it was quite comfortable to lie down on. In front of them was the training ground that old Marshal Omeng had designated. David and the rest were fighting with the elite soldiers in the rolling hills. As for Fei Rui, ever since they met at the propaganda department celebration party, he would chat and drink with Tang Yin from time to time. Tang Yin did not reject him. However, after a few times, he understood that Fei Rui probably had something he needed help with. He was a smart person and knew what he wanted. Similarly, he knew how to achieve his goal. Tang Yin did not have a good impression of such a character, but he also did not have a bad impression of it. Everyone has their own reasons for doing something or coming into contact with someone. It's understandable that they have their own reasons for doing so. The difference was that some people would fly into a rage out of humiliation after failing to achieve their goals, or they would burn bridges after achieving their goals. On the other hand, smart people would choose to let go of the business but not the friendship, or return the favor and maintain a good relationship for a long time. Fei Rui was undoubtedly a smart man. He had treated Tang Yin to wine for 3 months and then sold him a few copper coins a few days ago, saying that this was the last of his money and that he could not afford to treat Tang Yin any longer. Tang Yin laughed heartily and immediately returned the favor. At the banquet table, Fei Rui finally revealed his situation. It turned out that Fei Rui had always been sensitive to numbers and planning since he was young. After joining the Gray Coat Army, he had always wanted to enter the military logistics department. However, Fei Rui was the only son. Even in the logistics department, where the casualty rate was relatively low, his father, who was considered a middle-ranking leader in the Gray Coat Army, naturally disagreed. He even arranged for Fei Rui to do something similar to purchasing goods. Of course, this was not for the sake of corruption. The Gray Coat Army only purchased a few times a year, and every time, it was done by a minister. Therefore, this job was very relaxing. However, Fei Rui was still a young man, so he was naturally unwilling to do such a boring job. However, he also knew that it was impossible to convince his father. Other people like Minister Kuan Wei were powerful enough, so it was not a problem to plant someone in. Unfortunately, he was too familiar with his father, so he would be exposed if he asked. Other people who could do this, but were not familiar with him, were not easy to get along with. After all, people at such a high level were usually very busy and did not have the time to care about him. Just as Fei Rui was thinking about whether he should approach Leader Losha directly, Tang Yin appeared. Fei Rui was suddenly enlightened. Who else could be more suitable than Tang Yin? He had a lot of power and was not familiar with the higher-ups. Before the task was completed, his father would definitely not hear about it. After listening to Fei Rui's explanation, Tang Yin did not immediately agree. He only said that he would try. Then, he sent out the members of the Gray Space to collect information about Fei Rui and his father. When he found out that they were not lying, he decided to help. After all, Fei Rui had been drinking wine for 3 months. With Fei Rui's personality, it was a good idea to make a mutually beneficial friend. As for how to help, it was simple. Tang Yin was now helping old Marshal Omeng train elite soldiers, so this was not a problem. Moreover, it was just a referral. Fei Rui was indeed impressive. He easily passed the test and entered the military logistics department. He did not even know if it was because of Tang Yin or because Fei Rui was really talented, but he became a small official the moment he entered. All right, what did your father say? Tang Yin drank a mouthful of wine and smacked his lips. It tasted good. Did you sell me out? Ha, of course not. Fei Rui, who had gotten what he wanted, was very excited. He spread his hands and smiled. After I was beaten up, I was chased out. Tang Yin was stunned. He did not know whether to laugh or cry. I say, kid, you're actually so cheap. You were beaten up and chased out, but you're still smiling so happily? These are all, well, according to what you said, these are all fleeting clouds. Fei Rui drank a mouthful of wine and wanted to be full of pride. Unexpectedly, he coughed, and his eyes turned red. He stood up and shouted, "Dreams are the things that are truly worth cherishing. That's about it. Are you sour?" Tang and rubbed his nose and said lazily, That's true. Then let's have one that isn't sour. Fei Rue sat down again with a lazy smile on his face. He's my father. I'm the only son. After a few days, I'll go back looking a little sloppy. He'll still accept me, huh? Why else would he be called a smart person? Tang and shook his head and smiled. The two of them chatted for a while. Soon, David and the other soldiers came out from behind the hill. The result of the battle was obvious just by looking at the soldiers' bruised faces and dejected faces. Haha, I just finished my wine. Fei Rue threw the jar away and waved his hand. I'll go back first. Things are different now. The last sentence was the truth. Fei Rue could be considered a member of the military now. His attitude was naturally different from his lazy work in the past. In fact, if not for the fact that he wanted to thank Tang Yin, a newcomer like him would not even be able to ask for leave. Goodbye. Tang and waved his hand. He looked at the barren city wall in the distance and smiled. I'll find a time to look for you. I'll give you a big reward then. Oh. Fei Rue raised his eyebrows in surprise. He did not ask further and bowed with a smile. Then I'll thank you in advance. He left after saying that. Tang and nodded. His face was full of undisguised admiration. Not everyone would be able to keep their cool after hearing such words. No matter the world, there was no lack of smart people. However, not many knew how to hide their intelligence. No matter what Fei Rue did, even if he offended people, he would always give people the impression that he was a good person. Since the outcome of the battle had been decided, Tang naturally did not want to stay here any longer. He did this not because he was disappointed in the soldiers. In fact, they had improved a lot. He still remembered the first time they fought. They were easily tied up. Now that they were injured, it was obvious that David and the others could not hold back anymore. The reason he left now was because Luo Sha had sent someone to see him early in the morning. However, the soldiers did not know what Tang Yin was thinking. When they saw him leave with a calm expression, they pulled their hair angrily. They lost again. Damn it. They were ignored again. Taitan had received Tang Yin's message, but he naturally would not say it. He only said with a serious expression, Let's go. We'll continue training. The gray space was also trained. One day, we will defeat them. After a few months of training together, with Taitan's experience, he had already established his prestige. The soldiers' spirits were lifted when they heard this. They roared and turned back to training. Entering through the new south gate, Tang Yin disbanded the team and walked directly to Luo Sha's hut. On the way, he met little Carol. At this time, she was walking east with a large group of children holding wooden sticks and shields. Although she still had the same cold expression, there was finally a bit of life in her. Occasionally, she would even smile. As for her current posture, well, there was no doubt. As long as one was familiar with it, little Carol's strength was definitely the king of the children. Since she was the king of the children, she naturally had to take on the responsibility of making games. She thought about it and decided to teach them how to fight. However, there had to be someone to fight with. It just so happened that there were several other children's groups in the Gray Coat Army. Some of them were more special. Among the elders, there were people similar to the higher-ups of the Gray Coat Army. Although they did not have any advantages in life, they were children. If they felt that their father's identity was awesome, then they naturally felt that they were awesome too. Therefore, they were not willing to play with ordinary children. After little Carol targeted the other party, she simply asked for a fight. The other party did not think highly of them to begin with. When they saw the letter of challenge, they naturally would not give in. The result was needless to say. Those children all cried and went back to complain. The adults naturally did not care about the children's affairs. Some of them were bored and wanted to interfere, but after learning that the leader was the sister of the fiend Tang Yin, they gave up on the idea. Since then, little Carol's team had no opponents in the encampment. In fact, it should have ended there, but the key was that little Carol was stubborn. As long as the other party did not surrender and obey, she would continue to fight. As a result, she incorporated several children's groups. Who is it this time? Tang Yin asked casually as he met them. East City's Demao, little Carol replied. Tang Yin was taken aback. Didn't they just fight yesterday? Now that they're the only ones left, of course, we have to beat them until they're convinced, little Carol said matter-of-factly with a cold smile. What a sin, Tang, and rubbed his nose and heaved a long sigh. Then he waved his hand and turned to walk toward Rosa's hut. A childish voice came from behind. Of course, we have to beat them until they're convinced. Wow, Your Majesty. This sentence is so mighty and domineering. That's right, that's right. We are Her Majesty's knights. Now, we're going to conquer the evil thiefdom Mao. This time, we must make him kneel before the Queen. Shouldn't he kneel before the Queen? It's about time. Kill. Under the guidance of Queen Carol, the majestic army embarked on a journey that was destined for victory. The wheel of fate turned, and a new chapter of history opened at this moment. Waha. To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to Kamachidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 303. Knock, knock, knock. Come in. Leader, are you looking for me? Tang Yin pushed the door open and asked directly. He was slightly surprised and bowed. Old Marshal Omeng is here too. Omeng waved his hand casually and laughed. I just arrived. I was waiting for you. Other than Rosa, among all the higher-ups of the Grey Coat Army, the one who liked Tang and the most was undoubtedly Omeng. His many years in the military had cultivated a firm and upright character. He had seen Tang in strength, his contributions, and so on. So, even when he had broken Bull's leg in front of the tactical department, he had acted impartially and had not been biased. Now that Tang Yun was helping him train elite soldiers, he was naturally happy. Tang Yun, take a seat. After greeting him, Rosa took a stack of papers of different sizes and handed them over. Take a look at this first. Tang Yin calmly glanced at the various animal statues on the table and then glanced at Zhuo Fan in the corner. He took the paper and flipped through a few pages. He was slightly surprised. This is newspaper. Rosa nodded and gestured for him to take a look. To be precise, this is the recent newspaper about the Grey Coat Army in all the cities around the Sherwan Mountains. Josiah sent someone to send it back. Tang Yin nodded. Josiah had recently set up secret organizations in various cities. It was naturally easy for him to collect these. Oh, what's new? Tang Yin chuckled and flipped through the newspaper. Tang Yin's words were not without reason. He had seen the official evaluation of the Grey Coat Army. They were nothing more than old-fashioned mobs and bandits who had evil intentions and wanted to subvert the peaceful and harmonious empire. Tang Yin believed that Rosa must be clearer about this. Now that he had specially edited it, there was naturally a change. The true face of the Grey Coat Army is revealed. Oh, this is breaking news. The greatest enemy of the Empire's citizens, the Grey Coat Army, TSK. The Grey Coat Army with empty words. Tang Yin skimmed through the book at the speed of 10 lines at a glance. His tone changed from light sarcasm to teasing, and finally to questioning. His brows began to furrow from time to time. From the tone of these newspapers, there was no doubt that they were still belittling him, but the content had indeed changed. It was no longer the empty, slanderous remarks from before. Instead, it presented some seemingly credible reasons. In conclusion, the Grey Coat Army has been shouting slogans for so many years, but what have you done for the people? To be honest, this was indeed a weakness of the Grey Coat Army. The Grey Coat Army's principle of working for the benefit of the people would never change. However, in recent years, their strength has been weak and they have not been of much use. Secondly, the Grey Coat Army simply did not have the time to spare to do these things under the continuous encirclement and suppression of the Bulan officials. This is indeed a thorny problem. Tang Yin put down the newspaper and sighed softly. He could now imagine that if such a statement were to become mainstream and the Grey Coat Army did not take effective countermeasures in time, they would undoubtedly fall into a very serious passive position. Even the image that they had built up over so many years would collapse. Yes, but on the other hand, the city's publicity plan is indeed effective, and it has hit them where it hurts. Rosa's view was more optimistic, and it was the truth. The city was the center of the empire's noble class. Now that the Gray Coat army had infiltrated the city with great fanfare, they would naturally encounter strong resistance. The previous empty, slanderous remarks in the newspapers had become credible reasons. It was also the change in the nobles' attitude towards the Gray Coat army from ignoring them to paying attention to them. It could be said that from this moment on, the Gray Coat army had officially entered the eyes of the noble class. Tang Yin saw Rosa's attitude and raised his eyebrows. It seems that the leader has a well-thought-out plan. What plans do you have? Haha, I know I can't hide it from you. Rosa chuckled and then said seriously, the plan is very simple. Since they want the truth, we will give it to them. We have discussed it, and now there are a total of two most direct methods. One is to start from the villages and towns. Didn't you get rid of a lot of Lord's Knights before? We will take over these places and free the people there from the abyss of oppression and exploitation. This. Tang Yin's expression changed slightly. He frowned again and said slowly, I am afraid that is a little inappropriate. Tax was the most important source of income for a country. The Gray Coat army's actions would undoubtedly affect the fundamental interests of the empire. If this were to be exposed, yes, it would definitely be exposed because the Gray Coat army would use this propaganda to counter the argument of inaction. When that time came, the brand would definitely press in with his army and sweep through the 100,000 mountains to find and destroy them. Haha, this method is a little impulsive. Rosa did not object, but then he held his chin and said, but this is also the path that we must take in the future, and the timing now is a good opportunity. Tang Yin's heart skipped a beat, and he nodded thoughtfully. As everyone knew, the brand was now at war with the northern wilderness. And from the information received from some sources, it could be seen that the northern wilderness had been planning this for a long time and had mobilized almost all the forces of the tribes. At the beginning of the war, they were like hungry tigers that swallowed tens of thousands of miles and swept through countless strategic locations at the border. From this point of view, the Gray Coat army's choice to launch an attack at this time was really a rare opportunity. Of course, there was no meaning in this at all. After all, the two sides had been rivals for many years. What about the other method? Tang Yin could also hear from Rosa's tone that this was in the future. It seemed that the key to solving the current problem was still in the latter method. Take a guess. It could be seen that Rosa was in a good mood. He did not immediately say it out loud. Instead, he chuckled and said, let me give you a hint. What is the most abundant thing in the 100,000 mountains? Mountain, Tang Yin answered without thinking. Rosa's smile froze, and Omeng was also stunned. Then, he helplessly touched his forehead and did not know whether to laugh or cry. You can't ask us to open up a mountain, right? That's not good for the people. Good for the people, Tang Yin rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Then his eyes flashed. You mean mountain bandits? Huh, clap. Rosa clapped his hands and smiled at Omeng. See, I knew it wouldn't be difficult for him. Omeng stroked his beard and praised with a smile. This kid is very smart. So it's really mountain bandits. Tang Yin rubbed his nose and thought for a moment. Then he slowly nodded. We have to offend people eventually. Mountain bandits, well, it's better than the brand's army. Rosa's intention was obvious. They wanted to take down the mountain bandits who were known as half of the natives of the 100,000 mountains. This was indeed a good way to achieve immediate results. Mountain bandits were a great threat to the people in the north. Even for the Brand Empire, they were a headache. If they could get rid of them, it would undoubtedly be a good thing. Of course, they had to consider the possibility of backlash. Mountain bandits were not to be trifled with. Perhaps a single bandit group could be easily destroyed, but there were so many of them in the 100,000 mountains. Once they joined forces, their military strength would definitely be greater than the Gray Coat army. Fighting them head-on would definitely not be beneficial. Of course, Tang Yin believed that Rosa and the others would have their own countermeasures. Sure enough, after Tang Yin guessed the solution, Rosa took out a scroll and spread it out. On the scroll, there were many intricate lines and circles of various sizes. Pointing at the small circles, Rosa said, these are all the villages and towns in the 100,000 mountains. What we need to deal with are the villages and towns within 30 kilometers. When the time comes, we will send out a warning. If there are any bandits who are still here, we will eliminate them one by one." Rose's tone did not fluctuate, but when he pointed at the scroll, there was a hint of bloodlust and killing intent. Tangan nodded and did not object. The bandits' business line was the various mountain roads. If it did not violate this, the impact would definitely be smaller. Of course, this did not mean that the villages and towns were not important to the bandits. One had to know that the competition in the robbery business was very fierce. For some small bandit groups, there was not every day that they could do business. However, they were close to the villages and towns. From time to time, they could take in the autumn wind. At least, they could replenish their supplies. "Then why did you ask me to come here?" Tangan's face was calm as he asked, as if he did not feel anything. Rosa was stunned at first. Then he looked at Omeng with an expression that said, "I knew it." Of course, Tangan was asking the obvious. If he wanted to eliminate the bandits, he could not just send an army over. This was something that the Brand government and the Lord's army had already confirmed. The bandits had their own set of life-saving methods. Not to mention other things, just the hiding place alone was enough. Even a cunning rabbit had 3 holes, not to mention the bandits who lived on the edge of their blades and did business without any capital. Of course, the army had its own scouts, but dragons had their own ways, and rats had their own ways. They might not understand the bandits' way of thinking. However, the gray space was different. No matter who the target was, if it was in terms of hiding and tracking, it could be said to be a professional. But then again, what right did Tang In have to do these things? He was not Josiah. Right now, he pursued the principle of not doing anything without benefits. Yes, the people in the gray space were indeed from the Gray Coat Army. However, Tang In's contribution to the Gray Coat Army was even greater. It was not an exaggeration to say that the gray space now belonged to Tang In. The main reason he formed this team was to kill Sessman. It was fine if he helped a little, but if he had to go against the bandits, he did not want any unnecessary losses to his team before his goal was achieved. Of course, this did not mean that Tang In wanted to break off his relationship with the Gray Coat Army. That was not likely. Sometimes, it was just necessary to express one's attitude. If one had the ability, one could naturally ask for more. The gray space was not something that could be casually mobilized by just anyone. This was very important. Tangan did not want the team that he worked so hard to form to become cannon fodder in the end. Last time, an officer from the combat department was able to send the gray space to their deaths. He definitely could not allow this to happen again. Of course, Luo Sha was also aware of this, so she did not show any signs of discomfort or surprise. She seemed to be very confident. Soon, Tangan found out the reason. Tangan, I was just about to teach David and the others how to maximize the characteristics of fighting aura. It was a simple sentence, but because it came from a corner, the effect was very different. Tang opened his mouth and looked at Zwafan in a daze. A thought suddenly appeared in his mind. F***CK, isn't this just like how the matchmaker throws the newlyweds over the wall? You win. Tangan turned his head and gave Luo Sha a thumbs up. He agreed to this without hesitation. Tangan knew Zwafan's personality better than anyone else. Naturally, he would not make such a request. Without a doubt, this was definitely Luo Sha's suggestion. Luo Sha did not say anything, nor did she admit it. However, that sly smile of hers had already deeply betrayed her. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 304. The newspaper's mission was to convey the will of the ruler to the ruled, making them see hell as heaven. The other world could be said to be a world that lacked entertainment, especially for the ordinary people. This was because they couldn't afford to buy tickets to places like the Opera House and hunting grounds. Perhaps only the passing circuses and bards could bring them a little joy. Unfortunately, these two were performances that traveled all over the world and wouldn't stay in one place for long. Under such circumstances, The newspapers of every city in the Brand Empire were one of the few choices for the people. The price was fixed at 10 copper coins. It wasn't expensive, but it definitely wasn't cheap for people who barely had enough to eat and wear. The content in the newspapers was indeed rich, with business information, interesting stories from other places, and so on. Of course, there were more pages that sang praises for the city's political affairs. But whether they liked it or not, the official newspapers had a deep psychological impact on some people. A lie repeated 1,000 times was the truth. This principle could be said anywhere. Recently, the people's interest had shifted slightly from the stories of aristocratic women and young ladies having affairs in the newspapers to the political affairs pages. The reason was simple. It was because the words Gray Coat Army had appeared frequently. In the past 3 months, the Gray Coat Army had become a hot topic in some cities. The reason was needless to say. Naturally, it was because of the vivid, humorous, and satirical posters that suddenly appeared on the streets and alleys. There were also simple and unadorned posters that depicted real people. The city reacted quickly. While secretly searching for members of the Gray Coat Army, they began to counterattack in the newspapers. During this period, the eyes of the city's residents were overwhelmed. When one side published a comment notice, the other side would launch a sharp and sarcastic counterattack by the next day at the latest. Both sides had a war of words, going back and forth. The scene was extremely exciting. In the beginning, the official newspapers were completely at a disadvantage. The usual smears became dry and unconvincing in the face of the continuous emergence of real stories. After that, it was obvious that the officials began to pay attention. Gradually, they began to use examples to smear the truth. However, the good times didn't last long. Because the city's examples were too specific, and because it happened not long after the Gray Coat Army caught on and quickly confirmed that it was fake. This incident caused the official newspapers to be completely passive, and their credibility was also greatly damaged. After a painful lesson, it wasn't long before the argument that the Gray Coat Army had done something for the people appeared. Although the Gray Coat Army had explained before, their words were still a little weak because they didn't bring out any shocking deeds. Of course, this didn't mean that the Gray Coat Army hadn't done anything in the past few years. For example, killing a dozen greedy Lord Knights was also a good deed. Unfortunately, it wasn't suitable to expose these things. Seeing that the Gray Coat Army was delaying and showing signs of weakness, the city officials thought that they had grasped the other party's weakness. In just a few days, they immediately spread this argument to all the newspapers in the northern cities. Regarding such a situation, the citizens had two opinions. One was that they were deeply brainwashed and mocked the Gray Cloth Army for finally revealing their true colors. The other was that they didn't have a good impression of the nobles. After reading the Gray Coat Army's explanation, they expressed their understanding. They even added some words to the publicity paper, telling the Gray Coat Army not to care about this topic and to continue mocking the nobles. However, whether it was to watch a good show or to be worried, it didn't last for long. Because today, the Gray Coat Army once again issued an announcement that shook the entire city. The content was very simple. All the bandits in the 100,000 Mountains were to leave the villages and towns 30 kilometers away within 3 days. Otherwise, they would take tough measures. Although it wasn't explicitly stated, the people knew that this was the Gray Coat Army's aggressive counterattack against the officials' previous inaction. Didn't you want us to come up with something? This is the problem of bandits that you have been unable to solve. It was a slap in the face. The ordinary people were excited. Naturally, they didn't have a good impression of the vicious bandits. Therefore, even though they didn't encounter such dangers in the city, they still praised the Gray Coat Army's actions. Unlike the people, the officials began to have a headache. This kind of announcement wasn't suitable for a counterattack. They were going to attack the bandits. They couldn't be stupid enough to deny it. In the end, they could only cautiously express their pessimism. Then, they added a sour sentence. Actually, the Empire had never given up on eliminating the bandits all these years. Who knew that it would be better if they didn't add the last sentence? Once they added it, the people treated it as a joke and ridiculed it. How dare they mention it? The result was obvious. The Empire had been eliminating the bandits for hundreds of years, but the more they eliminated, the more bandits there were. In the general direction, the outside world mainly praised the Gray Coat Army's actions. Basically, there were no objections. The key question now was whether the Gray Coat Army could succeed. Everyone knew that the northern bandits weren't that easy to deal with. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the Northerners had heard about the dangers and various cruel acts of the bandits since they were born. But now they were still listening to it. Although they had previously complained about the efficiency of the Bran Empire, from this point, they could see how difficult it was to eliminate the bandits. The bandits naturally knew about the commotion in the city. There was no doubt about this. If a bandit wasn't well informed, he would only wait for the opportunity to come. Then, even if he was lucky enough to survive, he would only be a useless bandit. For example, if there was a caravan passing through the city, you would have to put a spy in the city to know the value of the goods. Where was the destination? How many guards were there? Which route to choose? As the saying went, only when one was dedicated to one's job could there be a day of income. However, knowing was one thing. The bandits didn't take the Gray Coat Army's warning seriously. What a joke. Even the Bran Empire and the 4 feudal lords couldn't do anything to them, let alone a small Gray Coat Army. Moreover, this was a big matter of cutting off their source of income. It would be strange if they heard about it. The bandits who laughed it off didn't know that the Gray Coat Army didn't want their approval. The Gray Coat Army just wanted to use their blood to prove themselves. The 100,000 mountains were still the same. There were more people in the mountains than there were people, and the wind didn't scare them. It seemed very desolate and sad. However, at this moment, an invisible storm was slowly forming. And because of the will of the person who started it, it was destined to sweep everything away and cleanse the world. TSK, TSK. Bet on the 100,000 Mountains Bandits versus Tang in gray space. Is there anyone who wants to bet on the bandits? I'll open a bet. Honest to all, carrot, to be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 305. Time flowed by like water during that brief moment in the White Steed. 3 days later, the 100,000 Mountains was still the same as before. The knights continued to ride roughshod over the girls under their rule. The commoners were still busy working as they calculated the next time they would have to pay taxes with a frown on their faces. As for the bandits, they continued to do business without any capital, lazily waiting for the fat sheep to appear on the mountain path, early in the morning, in a mountain stream somewhere. Such a stream was too common in the 100,000 Mountains. It was neither deep nor shallow, and the water was 10 feet wide. If it wasn't for someone leading the way, no one would know that there was a different world behind stream. That's our stronghold. Let me see. Well, thank you for your hard work. You're welcome. Give me a quick death. As you wish. Bang, bang. Splash. A body first fell to the ground, then rolled down the gully between the mountains, bumping a few times along the way, and finally smashed into the water. It floated up, but before it floated far away, wisps of blood gradually spread out. Above, there were about a dozen people standing side by side along the mountain path. After glancing down, they all withdrew their gazes. The ordinary-looking young man in the front shook his hand, and the dagger disappeared. He turned his head and calmly said, "Misho, take 2 people to the front to investigate. If you see any nails, just pull them out." "Yes, boss." A feminine young man nodded in response. Then, he led 2 men in black armor to climb up the mountain wall. Needless to say, this group of people was Tang In and the members of the Gray Space. As for the people behind them, they were the elite soldiers of Titan. Since 3 days had passed, Tang In, who had been captured, naturally had to start the work of clearing out the bandits. Of course, the terrain of the 100,000 Mountains was so vast that the Gray Space would definitely not be able to complete this difficult task. Therefore, Tang In and the others were responsible for finding the well-hidden strongholds of the bandits and marking them on the map. After that, the Gray Coat Army would come and wipe them out directly. Of course, if they encountered some small ones, Tang, In, and the others wouldn't mind clearing them out. After about a few minutes, a few rather clear chirps of birds suddenly came from above the mountain stream. Not long after, a few similar chirps were heard one after another, but the timbre was not as clear. What the hell is going on? Have no morals at all. It's so early in the morning, and Verdant Oriole is still sleeping. David curled his lips and muttered. Of course, the previous bird chirps were Michaud's secret signal, but David had recently been competing with him fiercely and liked to find fault with him. Twain glanced at David when he heard that. The latter shrunk his head and habitually showed an embarrassed smile. Let's go. Let's continue forward. Tang waved his hand and led the group forward along the mountain path for a while. And Michaud, and Michaud, and Michaud, and Michaud, and the mountain stream. At the same time, Michaud and the others were standing at the exit. There were two corpses lying motionless under their feet. Both of them were holding a crude short bow in their hands. Boss, it's here. Following Michaud's finger, everyone suddenly felt enlightened. In front of them was a small valley. From the caves on the mountain wall, it could be seen that this was a hidden paradise for beasts and birds in the past. But now, it was indeed occupied by a mountain stronghold. Inside, there was a wooden door, patrolling guards, a wooden watchtower, and so on. These bandits have good eyesight. This is really a good place to hide. Tang looked up and down and praised. This was a fact. With the mountain stream in front of them and the surrounding mountains, even if they observed from above, their line of sight would be blocked by the trees. Moreover, there is only one narrow passage here which was easy to defend and difficult to attack. It's just a little small. David nodded first, and then said, in terms of degree of concealment, this was definitely better than the Greycoat Army's base. Tang In and the others had found this place by extorting a confession from the bandit scout. However, this place was indeed a little small and couldn't hide many people. Small has its advantages. It could be used as a logistics hub for the Greycoat Army. Tang In thought for a moment, then took out a book from his pocket and added a line on it. Then he narrowed his eyes and said, and this also means that the bandit group in front of us isn't big. It's a good place for you to practice. After he finished speaking, Tang turned around and looked at Titan and the others behind him. Titan nodded knowingly and made a no-problem gesture. Then that's it. Titan and the others will arrange the tactics, and you will be the main attacker. As for you guys, Tang closed the book and put it in his pocket. He looked at David and Michaud and said, you just need to support. Yes, boss. After assigning the tasks, Tang turned around and looked at the elite soldiers. You are all veterans, so I won't say anything else. I want to emphasize that this is not a hypothetical war. I don't need prisoners. The soldiers trembled and raised their heads slightly. They couldn't hide the gleam in their eyes. They all saluted in unison. The atmosphere at the mouth of the mountain suddenly changed. Although it was still quiet, everyone here seemed to have heard the cries of battle, and the smell of blood was strong in front of their noses. There was something that, although invisible and formless, really did exist, and it brought a strong shock to the senses of others. This was the aura. These elite soldiers had all survived on the battlefield. Naturally, their every movement was filled with an iron-blooded aura that couldn't be concealed. Moreover, they had been holding back for a long time. Although they could clearly feel that their strength had improved, they had never won against the gray space. This made them, who used to be quite proud, suppress a ball of fire in their hearts. And the bandit group in front of them was undoubtedly the most suitable target to vent their anger. Tang felt the ripples in his eyes, and he felt a little proud in his heart. These people in front of him were all elites of various armies. Even if they couldn't form a team in the future, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that no matter which army they were placed in, they would be the main force of the army. They would definitely shine. However, they were all taught by him. This was probably the so-called sense of accomplishment. Tang didn't continue lecturing. He turned around and waved his hand. Then he moved forward in the direction of the mountain stronghold and quickly disappeared from everyone's sight. After about 15 minutes, Titan and the others finished their preparations. This was a small mountain stronghold. At most, there were about 200 bandits. The so-called strategy was actually very simple. These 15 minutes were actually spent on the preparation work. Big Brother Titan, you seem a little nervous. In a shallow gully a few dozen meters in front of the stronghold, David looked at Titan, who was tightly gripping his greatsword. Bullshit, this is excitement. Titan immediately turned around and glared at him. Then he emphasized, back when I was fighting with a sword, you were still waving a wooden stick with your snot. Oh. The burly man touched his hair and smiled awkwardly. He just saw that the soldiers behind him were a little too excited and wanted to calm down. But reality proved that he wasn't cut out for this. Titan raised his head and looked to the side and above. He nodded slightly. All right, everyone is in position. Do as I said before. After I break the door, you guys quickly rush up. Everyone nodded. Titan's eyes flashed. He raised his hand and made a gesture. Then, he charged out of the gully. Suddenly, David grabbed Titan's shoulder. Big Brother Titan, let me break the door. Ah. Titan was surprised. He asked in confusion, why are you worried that I won't be able to break the mountain stronghold's wooden door? Although the mountain stronghold's main door was made of wood, it was obvious that it was made of ironwood from the metallic luster on the surface. Titan had the strength of a peak beginner's do chi. Logically speaking, as long as it wasn't too thick, he should be able to break it in one hit. Although this sounded a little unreliable, there really wasn't a better way, because his do chi strength was the highest among all of them. In fact, Titan had already mentally prepared himself to attack multiple times. That would only make it more dangerous. No, if I do it, I might have a better chance. David hesitated for a moment, but still said, yes, I'm a mid-level warrior now. Titan opened his mouth, stunned on the spot. David had already raised his hand and made a gesture. He rushed out of his hiding place and headed straight for the main door. There was an open space in front of the gate, and with such a burly man running over, the 5 or 6 mountain bandits on sentry duty at the gate naturally saw him. However, before they could issue a warning, whoosh, 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 the bushes 100 meters away shook slightly. Several sharp arrows were shot out at the same time, whistling through the air in an instant. Bang, bang, bang. At almost the same spot, several blood flowers bloomed on the heads of the mountain bandits on the lookout post. Then, their figures disappeared from the stronghold's gate. The commotion here naturally alerted the 2 mountain bandits on the lookout post. Seeing 5 or 6 of their companions fall from the head, the 2 were shocked. They subconsciously raised their bows and were about to shout. Whoosh, whoosh. A whistling sound even sharper than the previous arrows rang out. The 2 mountain bandits raised their heads and felt a stabbing pain between their eyebrows as the sharp arrow pierced through. How was that possible? Before they could figure it out, their heads exploded and disgusting viscous matter splattered everywhere. The lookout post wasn't like the stronghold's gate. Although it was also used as a lookout post, the 2 mountain bandits on the lookout post were undoubtedly much safer, because whether it was the distance or the height, it was almost impossible to be attacked from a distance here. But now, they had been accurately shot in the head by an arrow from a few hundred meters away. It was so inconceivable that it was no wonder that their last thoughts were filled with doubt, as expected of the number 1 archer in the gray space. Compared with the shock of the 2 mountain bandits, the elite soldiers could only sigh as they looked at Luke with his black longbow in the air. That's right, the last 2 stunning arrows had come from Luke alone. Before the soldiers could finish sighing, David had already crossed the distance of several dozen meters to reach the wooden door. Roar! With a long howl, David raised his great sword high and slammed it down heavily. Just as the tip of the sword was about to touch the wooden door, a yellow battle aura instantly erupted like a flood. Boom! The stronghold's gate shook violently. Silk-like cracks quickly spread across the wooden door, followed by splinters and chunks of wood falling down one after another. Crack! Amidst the continuous explosions, the sturdy vines used to tie the door together also began to crack. Creak! Creak! David raised his head and blinked. Looking at the stronghold's gate that was tilted at a 45-degree angle, he cracked a smile. You, mother. Ah! Boom, boom, boom. Dust flew everywhere, and waves of air surged. In the gully, the soldiers were frozen in their positions. What the F***CK was going on? I only told you to smash the wooden door and make a hole the size of a person. Was there a need to smash the entire stronghold's gate? Save them. Some of the soldiers had already come back to their senses and cried out loudly. Nobody had expected things to suddenly turn out like this. The first thing they had to do now was naturally to save them. Wait! Titan grabbed the soldier and waved his hand. Compared to the others, his expression was extremely complicated. He wasn't worried, only shocked, ashamed, and a trace of unnatural awkwardness. Huh? The soldier who was held back was stunned. He looked at Titan in surprise, and his thoughts immediately went astray. In any case, he was half an instructor. Why didn't he save them? Could it be that the captain had a grudge against this David? No, that's not right. Wasn't he usually quite nice? Besides, even if there was a grudge, he should at least pretend to save them. Otherwise, how would he explain it to Instructor Tang? And when he returned, just as this soldier whose brain was overly active continued to let his imagination run wild, boom. Amidst the dust, splinters of wood flew everywhere again. A yellow figure followed closely behind and rushed out in an instant. Ba ba ba. As soon as he came out, he didn't care about anything else and spat out a mouth full of wood splinters. Needless to say, this was naturally David. Although he wasn't smashed to death, his dusty appearance was really embarrassing. However, the soldiers didn't have any happy thoughts at this time. Their attention was completely attracted by the layer of bronze armor on David's body, battle chi armor. As expected of an intermediate warrior, Titan's expression returned to normal. He rubbed his palms and sighed lightly. At the same time, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Just half a year ago, when he fought with David in the mine, David was still an apprentice warrior. Later, under his heavy pressure, David successfully broke through to the elementary level. But now, David was already an intermediate warrior with a battle chi armor. While he himself was still an elementary warrior, shaking his head, the proud Titan shook off the little bit of envy in his heart. At this time, he also saw the complicated expressions of the surrounding soldiers. Titan knew what they were thinking now, because he had thought about it before. Simply put, David had never displayed the strength of an intermediate warrior in front of anyone. Even when he fought with them, he had always used the strength of an elementary warrior. This caused the soldiers to have complicated thoughts in their hearts. It must be known that when they fought against David's group of 5 recently, they were already very close to success. Sometimes they all thought that as long as they worked a little harder next time, they would truly be able to wash away their shame. But now, how laughable. It turned out that David had never used his true strength. And from the looks of it, the others should be the same. Cough, cough. Titan cleared his throat and opened his mouth to say something. However, when he saw the confused look on the soldiers' faces, he shook his head and raised his sword. Brothers, let's fight. This is the real battlefield for us to wash away our shame. The soldiers were silent at first. Then they gripped the weapons in their hands and slowly raised them. The blank look on their faces retreated and was replaced with solemnity and determination before the battle. Kill, kill, kill. To be continued. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 306. Kill. Amidst the deafening battle cries, the soldiers rushed out of the ravine one after another. They only took a few steps before they separated into small groups of about 10 people. The purpose of this was not to scatter. If someone were to look down from above, they would see that these small groups were already in position, forming an attack formation. Titan's words weren't encouraging words, but a fact. Yes, everyone hated the members of the gray space to the core, but their real enemy was not David and the others. Moreover, it was obvious that they could not defeat them. Since that was the case, they could only prove their strength and worth by killing the enemy on the battlefield. At this moment, shadows began to flicker out from behind the stronghold. With such a huge commotion, as long as the bandits inside had ears, they would naturally run out to take a look. To be honest, the current situation was a little different from what they had expected. At first, Titan and the others only wanted to smash a hole in the door and then rush in to catch the enemy off guard. But now, well, looking at the panicked bandits, they had achieved their goal. But the key was that they were caught off guard as well. As the culprit, David was also feeling depressed. He thought that he should be able to break through the wooden door in one strike. After all, he had the strength of an intermediate combat chi warrior. However, he didn't expect such a frightening effect. He almost lost his life in the process. F***CK, this isn't shoddy, is it? Does it have to be so fragile? David grimaced, pretending to have a toothache. A door made of ironwood naturally would not be shoddy. In fact, David himself felt that all of this seemed to be the result of the explosive force training he had done in the past 3 months. Who's there? Those in armor. Don't tell me they're the soldiers? Why are you still talking nonsense? They're already at our door. Brothers, F***CK them and kill them. The bandits who ran out were stunned at first when they saw the collapsed door. Then, when they saw the fully armed and murderous Titan and the others, they could not help but tremble in fear. They thought that the brand's regular soldiers had come to kill them. But when they saw the number of enemies, their courage was instantly boosted. They waved all kinds of weapons and slashed at the enemy in a mess. Cut down the one who's standing there like a fool first. A bandit who seemed to be a small leader waved his hand decisively when he saw the young man standing beside the collapsed mountain gate. Naturally, it was David. Because he had dispersed his battle chi armor and was thinking about something, he was treated as a pushover. After coming back to his senses, David grinned and charged forward with his greatsword in one hand. However, before he could even get close, an attack had already arrived. The arrow sounded and the person fell. The leader who had just commanded was hit between the eyebrows by an arrow shot from above. He screamed and was nailed to the ground. Damn it, there's an archer. There. Mother asterisk cur. Where are our archers? Quickly suppress. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The continuous barrage of attacks was launched, and the bandits in the first row were unlucky. They were instantly killed one by one. And the one who caused this was a figure holding a black longbow in a cave about 100 meters away. After completing this swift and violent attack, the figure pulled the vines beside him and quickly swung them away. Thud, thud, thud. The bandit archers' scattered counterattacks quickly arrived, but unfortunately, they were all nailed to the mountain wall behind the black figure. It wasn't just dodging. After stepping on a mountain wall again, the figure suddenly hung upside down. The black longbow was drawn to a full moon. The bowstring vibrated, and the bandit archers who had just climbed up the observation tower in the distance fell to the ground. Whoosh, 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 this arrow sounded like the horn of attack. The sound of arrows whistling could be heard from the bushes where the bandit sentries above the mountain gate were killed. The position he chose was exactly where the black shadow had been shot out from the stockade earlier. After a few rounds of arrow rain, the charging bandits were shocked to find that not only were their archers unable to suppress the enemy, but they were being suppressed instead. But now, they didn't have the time to worry about this problem, because the guy who had been standing there foolishly was waving his greatsword in the crowd. He killed with a single blow and sent flying with a single touch, wreaking havoc in an area. Then, the murderous soldiers came before them. Kill! Titan roared and led the charge with a single sword. Bang! The bandit in front of him was sent flying with a single blow. Then, like a tiger in a flock of sheep, he killed his way into the bandits. The elite soldiers behind him followed closely behind, instantly tearing the gap even wider. The entire situation was like a red-hot iron rod poking into a bubble. They were unstoppable and unstoppable. This was a one-sided massacre from the start. Groups like bandits were mostly a motley crew. They were only suitable for fighting battles that went their way. Once they showed signs of defeat, their morale would plummet. Who on earth are these people? The bandits looked at the scene in front of them in horror, muttering in their hearts. If not for the constant reinforcements from the back of the mountain, this first wave of bandits would have already collapsed. Although this valley was hidden, it was still a dead zone for military strategists. If they were attacked, they wouldn't even have a place to run. These bandits watched as Titan and the others attacked mercilessly. They knew that if they didn't beat them back today, they wouldn't be able to survive. However, the strange thing was that even though these bandits were advancing wave after wave, there was still no obvious leader to organize them. This was no doubt strange. It also caused these bandits to attack chaotically without any order. Finally, an ordinary-looking young man pinched the bridge of his nose and grabbed a middle-aged bandit who was about to charge forward. He couldn't help but ask, "Where's your boss?" The bandit was stunned and answered instinctively, "I think he's at the Happy Cave." "Happy Cave? Then why aren't you looking for him? If he doesn't come out now, the mountain will be finished." Smack! Aya! The middle-aged bandit slapped his forehead and said in frustration, "Yeah? Brother, who are you? You don't look familiar." The young man raised his eyebrows and said, "I'm Big Brother, so you're Shandiao's distant uncle's aunt's cousins. Anyway, I just joined not long ago. Let's not talk about this for now. Let's hurry and find the boss." Yes, yes. The middle-aged bandit was already confused by this family relationship. Under the young man's tug, he didn't care about anything else and hurriedly led the way. A few minutes later, the two hurriedly ran to the back of the mountain. They were already at the mountain wall, but they hadn't reached the end yet. This was because there were a few large holes in the wall. The middle-aged bandit had already entered one of the holes with great familiarity. Clearly, this was the Happy Cave. However, even though it was named after joy, the moment they entered, the young man behind them could not help but wrinkle his nose. There was a faint stench floating in the air, and it was very unpleasant. He sniffed again, and a look of realization appeared on his face. He then rubbed his nose, and his expression became a little strange. The inside of the cave wasn't very dark. There were oil lamps all around to light up the place. After turning a corner, all sorts of sounds could be heard. There were panting, crying, shouting, and so on. After running a few dozen meters forward and passing through a tunnel, the lights suddenly lit up. The young man's long and narrow eyes narrowed, as if the edge of a blade had swept past. This was a rather spacious hall. The surrounding mountain walls had been dug out to form stone rooms that were several zhang wide. The outside was locked with iron bars. Dang, dang, dang. The middle-aged bandit who had entered earlier kicked the iron doors one by one and shouted angrily, "Stop fooling around. Someone has killed their way into the mountain." "What? How is that possible?" Cries of alarm rang out. The bandits were shocked and threw away the woman in their arms and ran out of the stone room. "Shut up!" the middle-aged bandit roared. After the surroundings quieted down, he looked around and asked, "Where's the boss?" "The boss is inside. He just went in." A bandit pointed at the tunnel behind them. "All right, hurry up and use your weapons to block them. I'll go inside and call the boss." The middle-aged bandit received his answer and ran into the tunnel without stopping. Seeing this, the bandits knew that things were not going well. They hurriedly put on their clothes and ran outside. However, at this time, the entrance was blocked by the young man with a calm expression. "Brother, why are you blocking the way?" "The Happy Cave." The young man shook his head and sighed. He lowered his head and muttered, The bandits looked at each other in confusion. What was he doing? "What the F*** are you talking about? Are you stupid? Get out of my way." A burly bandit was impatient and wanted to push the young man away. "I said poo." Blood bloomed on the burly bandit's back. "Silence, silence." The bandits looked at the dagger sticking out of their companion's back. Their mouths were agape, and they were stunned. The young man stirred the dagger and pulled it back. With a plop, the burly bandit fell to the ground. Dark red blood instantly spread out. "Just die." The young man sighed softly and looked up. He narrowed his eyes and did not hide the cold, killing intent in them. After he finished speaking, his body swayed left and right. Afterimages circled around the dozen bandits and finally appeared at the tunnel behind them like a ghost. He looked at the stunned women in the stone rooms and shook his head before walking in. Behind him, hiss, 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 bang, bang, bang. Thin veils of blood gushed out from the bandits' necks and landed on their companions. Then his body went limp and fell to the ground, forming an oval shape where his head and feet were connected. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 307. The passageway behind was not very long. After about 10 meters, there was another stone hall. Although this stone hall was not big, it was well decorated compared to the previous one. There were murals hanging on the walls, and there was a piece of crimson crystal inlaid on the ceiling, which shone a rather ambiguous light. There was a huge bed in the innermost part of the hall. On it, there was a man and a woman performing a great act of reproduction. The middle-aged bandit who came first was standing at the entrance, cowering in fear. He roared, "What did you say? Someone broke in?" Yes. Damn it, who is it? I'm not sure." The middle-aged bandit looked at the skinny man's darkened face, and his heart skipped a beat. He quickly corrected himself. "I think it's an officer. It's the Gray Coat Army." The middle-aged bandit and the skinny man were both stunned. They turned to look at the young man, who suddenly appeared. Patting the middle-aged bandit's shoulder, the young man smiled. "Thank you for leading the way. Then you can go to hell." He moved his palm sideways and placed it on the bandit's neck. "Gotcha!" He clapped his hands. Bang! He kicked the corpse of the middle-aged bandit into the corner. The young man looked around and raised his eyebrows. The atmosphere is not bad. The woman on the bed saw the young man casually kill a bandit in front of her and could not help but scream. Slap! Bang! Shut up! The scream suddenly stopped. The skinny man's face was filled with violence. He slapped the woman and the blanket on her to the corner of the room. Then he pulled the blanket around his waist and jumped off the bed. He looked at Tang In with a gloomy face. "Who are you?" The young man looked at the woman who was crying in the corner and spread his hands. "Didn't you hear me clearly? Well, I'm Tang In from the Gray Coat Army." "Gray Coat Army?" The skinny man frowned and seemed a little surprised. "When did we offend you?" Tang In touched his forehead. "You don't know about the notice in the city?" "What notice?" "Well, let's just say you don't know." Tang In shrugged and said indifferently, "That's not important anymore." "Well, I'm here to kill you and get rid of your bandit group." "Kill me? Just you?" "Ha!" The lean man bent over and laughed exaggeratedly, as if he had heard something incredible. Tang In's expression remained calm. "Interesting. You seem to think that I can't kill you. Why?" "Based on this." With a loud shout, the lean man clenched his fists. His body was surrounded by a green fighting aura. It seemed that his strength was close to that of an intermediate warrior. No. Twain shook his finger lightly with a mocking smile on his face. He looked straight into the eyes of the skinny man, as if he was looking at a clown. "Not only that, there's also that woman in the corner who keeps aiming with her crossbow." The lean man's confident expression finally changed. He roared, "Do it!" As soon as he finished speaking, he pounced forward. At this moment, whoosh! A crossbow bolt in the corner first pierced through the bedding, and then it quickly shot toward Twain. Tang In didn't move. His right hand brought a series of after-images as he waved it in front of him. Then his body swayed and intercepted the lean man who was about to jump out from his side. He raised his foot. "Gotcha!" "Awoo! Then a high-pitched scream drowned out everything, reverberating in the stone chamber. Tang In didn't look at the lean man who was rolling on the ground first. Instead, he glanced at the corner. The woman's eyes were slightly bulging, and her hands were grabbing her throat. She seemed to want to pull out the crossbow arrow, but in the end, she failed and fell sideways. At the same time, a small crossbow also poked out from behind the quilt. "Hee, you're really good at being an assassin." Tang In retracted his gaze and looked at the lean man. When the woman shot the crossbow arrow, he didn't choose to attack Tang In. Instead, he wanted to escape from the side. Obviously, he knew that he was no match for Tang In, so he was ready to abandon the woman and escape alone. "Do you know why I talked so much nonsense with you before?" "Hee, I just wanted to give you hope and then make you despair. I just want to play with you, just like how you play with those women. Spare me. They're all yours." "All right, and my treasures are all yours. I hid them in a secret place. No one can find them except me." The lean man rolled twice. His face was pale as he begged bitterly. "You're really talented." Tang and suddenly sighed and then curled his lips. Unfortunately, I don't want to play anymore. After saying that, he took a step forward and quickly stepped on the lean man's other leg. Gotcha! Ah, roar! The lean man screamed first, then his eyes turned blood red. He roared and supported himself on the ground. His right fist was mixed with the green fighting aura all over his body, and he threw a desperate punch at Tang En's head. How could a fighting aura warrior lose his ability to fight after breaking a leg? The lean man was so patient because he was ready to attack. Unfortunately, all of this was in vain. Tang En stepped to the side expressionlessly. He raised his hand and grabbed the lean man's wrist. Gotcha! Ah, the lean man was so angry that he didn't hesitate to wave his left fist. Gotcha! Bang! When he fell to the ground, his limbs were all twisted in an irregular shape. At this time, he could only roll on the ground and squirm like a maggot. Devil, you're a devil. Kill me. I beg you to kill me. The lean man's face was ashen. His eyes were filled with despair. He only wanted to die quickly. Thank you for the compliment, Tang En said plainly. He then took out a book and a feather pen from his arms. He squatted down and looked at the lean man who was sweating because of the pain. Next, I'll ask you 2 questions. You're a smart man, so you should know the consequences of not answering. Yes. But please give me a quick death. Tang En tapped his forehead with the feather pen a few times and then nodded. Deal. He paused and opened the book. First question, what's the name of the bandit group? Black Fox Bandit Group. Black Fox Bandit Group. Tang En wrote down the name as he muttered. Not bad. This name is very appropriate, especially for you. And second question, what's your name? En, is that your bandit name? Black Fox. The feather pen paused. Tang En was stunned for a moment. He then held his hand. I really admire myself more and more. I'm simply a prophet. Black Fox, a type of fox from another world. It didn't get this name because its fur was black, but because this type of fox was extremely cunning. People said that its heart was also black, so it was named Black Fox. Thinking about the lean man's performance just now, it was very suitable for this bandit name. Oh, Tang En closed the book, grabbed the lean man's right hand, and shook it. Thank you for your cooperation. You're welcome. The lean man first screamed, then gritted his teeth and replied. But in an instant, he saw a bloody light blooming at the place where their palms met. What are you doing? Don't worry. Tang En retracted his hand, patted the lean man's shoulder, and gently explained, I just want you to be unable to use your fighting spirit. Fighting spirit? The lean man asked doubtfully. At this time, he already had an ominous premonition in his heart. Tang En didn't continue to explain. He put the book and the pen into his arms and dragged the lean man's leg out. What are you doing? The lean man endured the pain and asked in panic. I'm fulfilling my promise, Tang En said without turning his head. Don't you want a quick death? I see that you like women so much, so I'll give you one last chance to contact them. TSK, it must be very satisfying. And it must be. Even I feel happy just thinking about it. Don't thank me too much. The lean man was stunned at first, then his face changed greatly. Damn it. You King broke your promise. Let me go. I beg you, give me pain. Let me die. I won't let you go even if I become a vengeful spirit. Oh, welcome. But there are too many vengeful spirits around me. I'm afraid you'll have to wait in line. Tang En curled his lips and replied casually. The women outside were all captured in robberies, so the lean man specially built this happy cave for them. As long as someone made a meritorious service or returned successfully from a robbery, the mountain bandits were all rough men. When they were in the mood, they would naturally humiliate them. The number of women who died here was really innumerable. The lean man didn't dare to imagine what kind of torture he would suffer if he fell into the hands of these women. Twisting madly, the lean man tried to break free, but at this time, it was as if there were countless small knives cutting his body. When the beginner fighting spirit met them, it was defeated and couldn't be used at all. Wait, cut. The lean man's heart suddenly moved. He immediately closed his mouth and stuck out his tongue, as if he had eyes on the back of his head. Tang and quickly turned around and slapped the lean man in the face. Then, he quickly dislocated the lean man's chin. "Sigh, I originally wanted to hear your high-pitched screams, but now it seems that I can only savor your low whimpers. Ugh, ugh. Neb's oyster for. You will die a horrible death." The lean man was really desperate. This person called Tang and was really too shrewd. All of his thoughts were quickly seen through. "Curse all you want. I'm a demon," shaking his head. Tang in through the lean man in the middle of the hall. Then, he stepped forward and crushed the lean man's limbs. "Kacha, kacha, kacha. Crackle, crackle, crackle. Ah, ugh, ah." The 10 fingers were connected to the heart, let alone the 4 limbs. Even though his chin was dislocated, the lean man still let out the loudest scream he could muster. The surrounding women trembled and subconsciously wrapped their arms around their chests. Then, they slowly moved their eyes to look at the hall. Seeing that he had attracted the attention of the women, Tang In retreated to the side. He was not the main character here. "Ahem, I'm from the Gray Coat Army." "Of course, that's not important now. You just need to know him. In, I'll give you 15 minutes. After that, I'll come and pick you up." After saying that, Tang In stepped forward and violently pulled open the iron doors of the stone room. Then he walked out of the cave. Behind him, they were at a loss for a moment. Then they slowly crawled out of the stone room. They stood up and looked around. There was no change in their eyes until they saw the squirming figure in the middle of the hall. It was unknown who took the lead first, but the women slowly gathered around. "What are you doing? Get out of here." Looking at the expressionless women, the lean man's eyes darted around. An uncontrollable chill surged in his heart. It even covered the effect of the blood invasion. However, no matter how he cursed and acted viciously, the women still came to his side. After a moment of silence, a woman bent over, opened her mouth, and bit his ear. Some of the women stretched out their fingers and dug into their eyes. Ah. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 308. After a few months of leisure, Tang In once again fell into endless busyness, as if he was paying off a debt. How many bandits were there in the north? No one knew. No one would be so bored as to do the statistics, because the data changed almost every day. Of course, the increase was far more than the decrease. Although they didn't do it personally every time, the tiredness of the days of running around still made everyone a little tired. Fierce bandits, cowardly bandits. Bandits were still bandits in the gray space, other than little Carol, who was still excitedly looking for opportunities to attack with her scythe. Even Tang In couldn't help but sigh. What heroes were born in troubled times? This was clearly an endless stream of bandits, of course, although it was tiring. The results were still very obvious. In a few days, there were more than 10 bandit groups that had been wiped out by Tang In and the others. As for the Gray Coat Army, there were even more that had been wiped out. The Gray Coat Army's new base was still some distance away from the city, so it was inevitable that there would be some delay in the transmission of the information. 3 days after the warning was issued, the results of the first day's bandit suppression were posted in various cities. The publicity paper this time was a little huge, not because the language was cumbersome, but because the content was too long. Black Fox Bandit Group, wiped out. Bandit Leader Black Fox, killed. Eagle Bandit Group, wiped out. Bandit Leader Lying, killed. One-Eyed Giant Bandit Group, wiped out. Bandit Leader One-Eyed Dragon, killed. The above information is true. The heads of the bandit leaders of the various bandit groups will be sent to the nearest city, Gate 1, after another. To be continued. The densely packed small words were neatly arranged, extending down one by one until they filled the entire surface of the paper. No city resident would not be moved when they saw this. Although it was only a few rows of small words, it represented the elimination of bandit groups that were full of evil. Perhaps it was because there were too many words gathered together, but the people who were watching suddenly felt a little dizzy. In a daze, the black words gradually turned red, blood red. Then something slowly dripped down from it. Then, slowly, those words faded away and were replaced by battle scenes. The valiant gray coat army soldiers shouted the slogan of justice, charging forward like a torrent, cutting down the terrified bandits one by one. Sinful blood flowed on the blade, and the souls of those who had died unjustly at the hands of the bandits were cheering by the side. Suddenly, the cheers gradually became clear and real. This is the holy war of the Gray Coat Army. Long live the Gray Coat Army! Long live! The call sign rang out in every street and alley, in every district, in every city in the north. Even though the lives of these bandits were far from those of the city's residents, they were still inspired by the content and the execution of those heinous bandits. The townsfolk couldn't hold back their excitement and rushed to spread the news. Then, he looked at the last sentence on the promotional paper. To be continued. What did this mean? This meant that the Gray Coat Army's actions hadn't stopped. It meant that there were still bandit groups being killed. The heads are outside the city. Let's go to the city gate. No one knew who was the first to make the call, but the scattered people in every city began to gather. It was like a small stream flowing into a river, pushing the tide and moving unswervingly towards the sea. In the face of such power, the garrison troops in the city, the police station, and so on were collectively speechless. They knew that they had to stifle this momentum and not let it grow stronger. In fact, the nobles had indeed issued such a notice, but none of the military officers dared to give such an order. Of course, even if they gave the order, no one would carry it out. What kind of joke was this? Even idiots wouldn't play like this. If they went up now, it would be strange if they weren't torn to pieces when these people arrived at the city gate. Of course, there were no heads here. The news was easy to spread. A single person could travel on horseback for a few days. However, it wasn't easy to transport so many heads. However, the people weren't too disappointed. In this spacious place, they could use it to celebrate and cheer, casually mocking the official newspaper. This was because the newspapers in every city were compiled the day before and sold the next morning. On this day, the Gray Coat Army was promoting their achievements. However, the official newspaper was still belittling the Gray Coat Army, repeating the argument that they didn't do anything practical and that they weren't optimistic about their operation this time. Without a doubt, such a sharp contrast was undoubtedly a heavy slap in the face. Some of the people waved the propaganda paper of the Gray Coat Army in one hand and the official newspaper in the other, leading the surrounding crowd to mercilessly mock the people who compiled the newspaper and affectionately greet their distant relatives compared to the city. The atmosphere in the villages was more lively. In fact, the villagers had known about this news much earlier. After all, the bandit groups that were wiped out weren't far from their village. The villages weren't like the cities. The city's security was too tight. The Gray Coat Army had to be careful when promoting, not to mention publicizing the location, accepting donations, and soldiers who had joined the army. Even the secret contact organization established by Josiah was only for publicity and the inevitable gathering of information in the future. However, the villages were different. The jurisdiction here was extremely weak. In addition, the chevalier who had mysteriously died some time ago made these old men even more afraid to go out. Therefore, after the villagers celebrated, they started a small climax of donating things and joining the Gray Coat Army. Of course, the ones who were the most depressed were undoubtedly the bandits. Due to competition, the bandits didn't have a good relationship with each other. They basically didn't interact with each other, and sometimes even became enemies. However, now that a large number of their peers had died, the remaining bandits felt a sense of sympathy. Among them, the bandits who had chosen the location within 30 kilometers of the village felt the most strongly. They knew about this news earlier than the announcement in the city, and at the same time, their feelings were more complicated. Of course, there was anger, but there was more worry and conflict. After all, no one knew when that group of goddamn Gray Coat Army would suddenly appear in front of them. After all, it was a matter of life and death. As for the conflict, it was because the bandits' mentality was beginning to waver. With so many of their peers dying in front of them, it was impossible to say that they weren't afraid. However, being a bandit was equivalent to being out in the streets. Their heads were tied to their waistbands, and what they valued was a fearless aura. If they left just because you told them to, wouldn't they lose face if word got out? How would they survive in this world in the future? How would they be able to raise their heads in front of their peers? But then again, if they didn't leave, it would be obvious that they couldn't beat them. They would definitely die. Sigh, what a conflict. It wasn't that no one thought of gathering their peers and resisting the Grey Coat Army's atrocity of interfering with their proper occupation. However, most people didn't have the authority to do so, and no one responded to their words. Those who had enough authority were mostly stationed beside the main mountain roads, far away from the village. Since they didn't have to worry about this problem, they wouldn't take the lead. However, just as the small bandit groups were feeling restless and conflicted, they received an invitation. After the bandit leaders read it, they couldn't help but raise their heads and laugh. Then, they mounted their horses and left the village with their trusted aides. Needless to say, another storm was beginning to form. Unfortunately, not every storm could erupt. Most of the time, they would only turn into a cold wind that didn't hurt or itch. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 309. In the evening, night had just fallen. In a secluded valley in the 100,000 mountains, the cold wind did not enter, and bonfires burned brightly. The flickering flames tried their best to expand the range of the fire, and in this way, the towering mountain stronghold began to show its magnificence. In the hall, there were many figures. Hello, hello. Nice to meet you. I'm the leader of the Wild Wolves, Wolfhead Tiger. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. I'm the leader of the Axe Mountain Bandits, Arthur. My nickname is Little White Dragon of the Land. Cough, cough. I've heard a lot about you. Brother Arthur's nickname is really domineering. Ha, is it? It's just a compliment from my brothers. Actually, I think Big White Dragon of the Land is better. Brother Tiger, you don't look too good. Oh, it's the wind, is this little brother also in this line of work? Haha, yes. This is my younger brother, Little White Tiger of the Land. I brought him out this time to see the world. Bandits, of course, you have to start from child. Tis K, Brother Tiger, why did your expression change again? It's freezing cold. You have to be careful. You have to know that your body is the capital of robbery. Thank you. You're indeed a young talent. I saw someone familiar, Brother Arthur. I'll go over first. Okay. Can you introduce us? There was a boiling cauldron of voices, and all kinds of greetings rose and fell. It looked like a banquet hall. However, if someone rashly barged in, they would realize that almost everyone here looked unfriendly. There were all kinds of weapons on their waists, axes, sabers, heavy swords. Yes, there was no doubt that everyone here was a bandit, and a bandit leader at that. Well, no matter what, the hall gradually warmed up because there were so many people and lively voices. Although there were so many bandits gathered here, the atmosphere was still good. Even if they met an enemy, most of them just glared at each other and walked away. No one chose to deliberately cause trouble. Such behavior, of course, was not because the bandits' moral index suddenly rose and became law-abiding citizens. Instead, it was because of the environment here. This was the Gale Bandit Gang's stronghold. It was undeniable that the fierce Gale Bandit's name was a little uncouth. However, if one were to look at it from the perspective of having a stronghold in a valley, having nearly 10,000 bandits under its command, and standing tall in the 100,000 mountains for several decades without falling, this rustic name would undoubtedly become a classic passed down by word of mouth. The bandits refused to submit to the empire and were not afraid of the army. However, they were in awe of the giants in the same industry. Therefore, the leaders of these small and medium-sized bandit groups were tactful and did not fight here. Everyone knew about the current situation in the 100,000 mountains. Naturally, there was a reason why the leaders of these brigands did not stay in their strongholds to think about how to get through this difficult situation. Instead, they came here to attend the gathering. Of course, they had no choice but to come because they had all received an invitation from the Squall Bandits. The contents of the meeting weren't mentioned, but everyone knew that it was to discuss how to deal with the Gray Coat Army. As such, the bandits were more than happy to go. The reason for this conjecture was because there was also a village next to the Gale Bandits, even though the village wasn't big and only had about 100 people. Furthermore, with the Gale Bandit style, they would naturally disdain to rob it. However, it was undeniable that the Gale Bandits were indeed within a 30-kilometer radius. They were a suitable target for the Gray Coat Army to eliminate. However, some of the more intelligent and knowledgeable bandit leaders muttered in their hearts. Even though the Gale Bandits were indeed a potential threat, with their influence, why would they be willing to put aside their pride and take the initiative to invite the other bandit groups to come and help? There must be more to this than meets the eye. Just as the hall was bustling with noise, the side door suddenly opened. A middle-aged man in a dark-colored cloak walked in with a few followers. He stopped in his tracks, frowned slightly, and looked around. The hall instantly fell into silence. Everyone subconsciously avoided the middle-aged man's gaze. Some who were originally seated could not help but stand up. Thick eyebrows, big eyes, and a rigid face. This was a rather dignified middle-aged man. On the surface, he looked like a noble or a general with a high position. However, in reality, he was the leader of the Gale Bandits, Breno. Breno seemed to be satisfied with this effect. He nodded and walked toward the large chair directly opposite the door in the hall. He stood still, turned around, and raised his hand. These few simple actions were full of vigor. "Good evening, fellow bandit leaders. I am Breno of the Gale Bandits. Thank you all for giving me face and attending this gathering." He paused, bowed slightly, and waved his hand. "Please take a seat." This was not the meeting hall. Naturally, the bandits did not have the intention to clap their hands and show respect. However, this silent atmosphere and the crowd that sat down in unison still showed the domineering aura that the middle-aged man exuded with his every move. Breno sat behind the chair in the middle. He did not speak and waved his hand to the side. A guard immediately took a step forward, took out a piece of paper, and read, "In the past 5 days, a total of more than 100 bandit groups of various sizes have disappeared in the 100,000 mountains. About 60,000 people have died, and these are only the results of our preliminary investigation. In reality, the number of people that have disappeared is far more than these." After he finished speaking, the guard stepped back. There was a small commotion in the hall. The bandit leaders seemed to be uncomfortable as they shifted in their seats. They looked at each other, their eyes full of unconcealable shock. Although they knew that many of their peers had been wiped out in the past few days, they had not done a systematic count. Now that they heard these shocking figures, the fear in their hearts grew even more. Cough, cough. They cleared their throats and suppressed the discussion in the hall. Breno's expression turned solemn, and a cold glint flashed in his eyes. The actual situation is clear. The purpose of inviting everyone here is very simple. It is to discuss how to deal with the Gray Coat Army. After he finished speaking, the hall was silent for a while. Then a voice sounded. "What's there to discuss? We will listen to Boss Breno. As long as you are willing to come out and gather our strength, the small Gray Coat Army will be nothing." I agree with this statement. "Yes, Boss Breno, just say the word. We will listen to you." All the bandits nodded in agreement. This was also what they had thought when they came here. The Gray Coat Army was not like the regular army. When the regular army surrounded and suppressed them, the bandits could only hide no matter how big or small they were. This was because they knew the strength of the Empire's military. However, the Gray Coat Army was different. Don't be fooled by how happy they were now. As long as the fierce Gale Bandit group was willing to take the lead, and with the agreement of over 100 other leaders, their military strength would be at least 100,000. In this way, there was no need to mobilize others to deal with the so-called Gray Coat Army. "All right." Breno slapped the chair and stood up. He said in an imposing manner, "Then I will solemnly promise here today that the fierce Gale Bandit group will be part of the attack on the Gray Coat Army this time." "Haha, that's how it should be. Boss Breno, we will follow your lead this time. We will do whatever you say." We also agreed to join. This Gray Coat Army is too arrogant. If we don't show them some strength, they won't know who the real master of the 100,000 mountains is. The atmosphere in the hall instantly became lively. No matter what the reason was, all the bandits agreed to join the attack on the Gray Coat Army. As for the leader of this operation, it would definitely be Breno and his fierce Gale bandit group. No one had any objections to this. In the bandits' business, the strong preyed on the weak. Those with more power and more help would naturally be the boss. Seeing the situation in the hall, Breno nodded slightly and spoke again. Since everyone has decided to join, then I propose to form a bandit alliance. The purpose of this alliance is to eliminate those who harm our interests. Hee. At this point, Breno chuckled and looked around, of course, according to the unwritten rules of our business. I will be the boss of this alliance. Of course. If you don't take this position, who else can? I agree. I don't agree. Neither do I, huh? In a short few seconds, the lively hall once again fell into a strange silence. All the bandit leaders turned their heads and looked for the source of the "I don't agree" in astonishment. I don't agree. There is no need to look around because the person stood up himself. It was an ordinary-looking young man with 2 large axes at his waist. Breno's face darkened and he frowned slightly. He looked at this person steadily. You don't agree? Who are you? I am the boss of the Axe Bandit group. The young man purposely straightened his back. Under the light, the 2 axes at his waist shone brightly. People have given me the nickname Little White Dragon of the Land. That's me. After speaking, he turned around and gave a simple salute. Little White Dragon of the Land? Where did such an idiot come from? All the bandit leaders shook their heads and couldn't help but pout. In this business, one had to have good eyesight. In this situation, even if he didn't agree, he shouldn't have said it in front of so many people. Where would Boss Breno's face go? Wasn't this courting death? Axe Bandit Group? Breno frowned. To be honest, he hadn't heard of it before, but he didn't flare up on the spot. How many people do you have? Without a doubt, this was a very tacky question. However, this was how the bandit hierarchy worked. Just as Breno had said, this was an unwritten rule. The young man scratched his head and seemed to think for a while. Finally, he answered about 40. After speaking, Breno's tough face instantly darkened. The coldness in his eyes was threatening. Whoosh! The hall was in an uproar again, but this time it was mostly mocking. Is this guy sure he didn't come to the wrong place? More than 40. Mother of asterisk her. When I started out, there were at least 100 people following me. Isn't this, teasing Boss Breno? TSK. Are all the young people nowadays courting death so courageous? Damn it, there must be something wrong with his head. When I greeted him just now, I was almost speechless. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 3:10. The lanterns were brightly lit, and the atmosphere was strange. Because a certain fellow with some mental issues had come out to mess things up, this originally solemn and blood-boiling, blood-smearing alliance conference was now more like a farce with a different flavor. There was a senior who said it well. When you came out to make a living, you basically relied on 3 things: courage, loyalty, and a lot of brothers. There was no need to say anything about courage. Those who dared to rob with black hands and a black heart were basically no cowards. As for loyalty, that was harder to say. Things like adding flowers to brocade and doing favors at little cost were fine, but if it involved one's own interests and safety, how should one put it? It wasn't good to have a reputation for backstabbing, but when it really needed to be done, there wasn't much pressure. In conclusion, it was better to rely on oneself than on others. However, the strength of a single person was ultimately limited. Having a large group of loyal subordinates was very important. Although there were existences like the Dusk Hunter group that could fight against 100 or more people, they were still in the minority and not common. The mainstream evaluation of power was still based on who had more people and more knives. As such, this hot-headed youth with over 40 subordinates dared to disagree with the suggestion of the Gale Bandit group's leader, who had close to 10,000 members. It was truly amusing. So you want to be the leader of this alliance? It wasn't clear if he was shrewd enough or if Bruno was too angry, but he actually stopped the guard who was about to rush out and asked indifferently. Of course, to the bandit leaders, This was the precursor to Bruno's outburst. This youth was most likely going to be used to establish his might. As if he didn't hear the mockery in the words, the youth shook his head honestly. I won't be few. Everyone secretly sighed in relief, and, at the same time, felt some joy in their hearts. Listen, it's not that I don't know how to be, it's not that I don't have the qualifications. This was a tone of disdain. After a pause, the youth said, I feel that the name of this alliance doesn't sound good. Or rather, the goal of this alliance is a little complicated. Bruno's eyes narrowed, as if he was slightly surprised. He stared deeply at the youth again. Since we're going to surround and kill the Grey Coat Army, why not call it the Surround and Kill the Grey Coat Army Alliance? Speaking up to this point, the young man was no longer in a daze as he said, clearly, you just said that the purpose of this alliance is to eliminate those who harm our interests. In other words, it's not just the Grey Coat Army in front of us, right? Then can I put it another way, that is, you want to take in all of us and call yourself king? The hall fell into absolute silence once again, and an unknown atmosphere surged. Bruno gripped the armrest of the chair and leaned forward. His expression was solemn as he looked at the young man. The latter did not seem to have any self-awareness. He did not meet Bruno's gaze. Instead, he turned his head left and right, as if he was very interested in the bandit leader's expressions. At this moment, everyone's expressions were indeed interesting. They were all leaders of their own factions. Previously, due to the atmosphere in the hall and their lack of vision, they didn't notice Brunner's true intentions. However, after listening to the young man's analysis, how could he not understand? Some of the more quick-witted ones finally solved the doubts in their hearts. This was the reason why the Gale Bandits had taken the initiative to invite them to help. Actually, with the strength of the Gale Bandits and the fact that they had no history of invading the nearby villages, the Grey Coat Army would not be able to touch them easily. This was also the truth. Although the slogan was to clear out all the bandits within 30 kilometers of the village, Rosa and the others were not inflexible people. This could be seen from the range that they had previously limited. The bigger the pot, the more rice you could cook. This was a principle that everyone understood. Of course, this was not because the Grey Coat Army could not defeat the Gale Bandits. In fact, as long as the Grey Coat Army was willing to pay the price, they could still take them down. However, the key was that the Grey Coat Army's main enemy was the Bran Empire. Naturally, it was not suitable for them to do such a thing now. As for the Gale Bandits, although they were a large bandit group, they had not yet squeezed into the ranks of the top bandit groups in the 100,000 Mountains. Obviously, Brunner intended to use this opportunity to integrate more than 100 bandit groups and climb to the top of the pyramid of bandit groups in the 100,000 Mountains. After understanding this, the bandit leaders looked at each other. There was no longer the surprise in their eyes. Where the F***CK did you pop out from? Spouting nonsense here. After a period of silence in the hall, a middle-aged, burly man stood up among the bandit leaders and shouted angrily. Moreover, even if Boss Brunner did this, what's wrong with it? If everyone gathers, won't business still be done? Moreover, we can do a big one. Hearing this, the bandit leader's eyes flickered. Although this person's words were somewhat idealistic, they were also correct to a certain extent. After their bandit groups were merged by Brunner, they would definitely not be as free as before. Moreover, they would have to submit to others and listen to their orders. However, everyone's goal in becoming a bandit was to earn money. Once they gathered their strength, they could consider robbing the large merchant groups that they could only look at enviously before. However, no matter what, after weighing the pros and cons in their hearts, they still felt conflicted and were slightly against it. This had happened too suddenly. They believed that if Brunner slowly merged them one by one, although it would take a longer time, most of the bandit leaders would still agree. However, Brunner was clearly anxious now. He wanted to swallow them all in one go. But then again, he had the confidence to do so. If he did it one by one, there would inevitably be unforeseen circumstances. Now that a disaster was right in front of them, it would be a disaster if everyone did not agree. Moreover, they were in his territory now. I remember you. The young man was not frightened by the middle-aged, burly man's evil behavior. Instead, He pinched his chin and said calmly, "You said a total of 3 sentences just now, and you were the one who agreed every time." The middle-aged, burly man opened his mouth and was stunned. The bandit leaders raised their eyebrows and looked at the people around them in understanding. This was a simple and effective trick. From a professional point of view, this person was a prop. Since Brunner had such a plan, he would definitely have informed a few of them beforehand and promised them benefits so that they could stir up the atmosphere in the hall. To be honest, this was also reasonable. Most of the people here had used it before. However, once it was exposed, the bandit leaders felt even more uncomfortable. "So we were all schemed against and played like monkeys just now? You. Under everyone's gaze, an unnatural expression flashed across the middle-aged, burly man's face. Then, he pushed the crowd away angrily and pushed his bear-like body forward a few steps. He raised his hand and pointed it at the young man's nose. "How dare you slander me? I'm warning you. The last person who pointed at my nose had his finger broken like a brittle radish," the young man said calmly, cutting off the other party's words. It was normal for people to say harsh words when they did not agree. Although it was a little rough, everyone here was a bandit. Naturally, they did not consider elegance. However, even so, the bandit leaders were still slightly stunned because the middle-aged, burly man actually put down his arm obediently after hearing that. As a bandit, there was no bottom line. Being able to submit and stand tall was the way to survive. However, that also depended on the person and the situation. You actually listened to the calm words of such a young man? This was too king immoral. Of course, the middle-aged, burly man did not think so. In that instant, he met the young man's eyes. What kind of gaze was that? It was like a ferocious tiger looking back after climbing a mountain. Although it was only a glimpse, the great power in it was enough to shake one's soul. In a situation where he felt an inexplicable chill both on the outside and inside, he subconsciously put down his arm. However, when he came back to his senses, he realized that the young man's gaze was indifferent. There was no sudden pressure at all. This huge difference made him wonder if he had seen wrongly just now. Then, after feeling the disdainful gazes from around him, the middle-aged, burly man's face heated up and anger gathered in an instant. Ahem. It was unknown whether it was to help him out or for some other reason. But Breno opened his mouth again. "I didn't make it clear just now. This young man is right. I do have such a plan. What do you all think?" He casually brushed aside the previous cover-up and made it public now. It was as if he was saying that the young man's previous analysis was just a small oversight. When the bandit leaders heard this, they were conflicted again. It was naturally not good to discuss such matters with outsiders, and it was naturally not suitable for the few reinforcements to come out and sing praises now. Therefore, for a moment, the hall gradually fell into silence. If I say no, it was the young man who spoke first. He took a few steps forward and met Breno's slightly angry gaze. "You won't be unable to walk out of here, right?" The extremely quiet atmosphere began to stir again. This was also the problem that the bandit leaders were worried about. Originally, this topic was not suitable to be discussed in public. However, if someone brought it up, it would naturally be a different matter. Breno's expression was a little ugly. His gaze was like a sharp knife that cut the young man's face. This could be said to be his invisible advantage. Even if he did not make such preparations, the bandit leaders would have to consider the consequences before making a decision. However, now, of course not. The Fear-Scale bandit gang's stronghold gate is not closed yet. Young man, if you want to leave, you can leave now. Of course, if you feel that the mountain path is rugged, the moon is dark, and the wind is strong, you can rest in our stronghold for the night and leave tomorrow morning. Breno lived up to his name as the leader of a large bandit gang. He gave such a beautiful answer after thinking for a while. That's right. These words sounded very polite and considerate. However, if one thought about it carefully, there was a faint hint that the journey was not safe. It was hard not to speculate. However, hearing such an answer, the young man frowned and seemed to think for a while. Then, he nodded seriously and said, "That's true. If I were to be intercepted halfway, I still wouldn't be able to escape. Awkward silence. The corners of Breno's eyes twitched. His expression was so gloomy that it seemed like it could drip water. Do you have to be so blunt? The bandit leaders looked at each other with strange expressions. If Breno's previous words were to regain their invisible advantage, then this young man had undoubtedly pierced through the window paper again. Everything was exposed under the sun, and there was nowhere to hide. Damn it, how dare you? When the middle-aged man saw Breno's expression, he took a few steps forward and roared. I'm speaking the truth. The young man spread his hands with an innocent expression. T. I felt that something was wrong with you from the start. The middle-aged man raised his arm and poked the young man's eyes. Speak. Who are you? Are you sent by another bandit gang to sow discord? Without a doubt, this was a framing and an excuse to make a move. No, I'm from the Gray Coat Army. Haha, as expected. You have the guts to report the address of your Gray Coat Army stronghold. Aye. Gray Coat Army? To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 311. I knew it. You have the guts to tell us the address of your Gray Coat Army stronghold. Aye. GG. Gray Coat Army? Yes. The young man nodded and admitted it easily. Then, he flipped his hands and a blade appeared. At some point, the axe at his waist had appeared in the young man's hand. He swung it down casually. Hiss! Blood splattered, and something that looked like a short and thick radish flew up. The middle-aged man who had yet to recover from his shock held his palm and retreated while howling in pain. Blood dripped down continuously. I warned you, but you didn't listen. The young man shook his head with a look of pity. Then, he straightened his clothes and bowed to the petrified crowd. Under the witness of this bright light, I think it's necessary for us to get to know each other again. Tang In of the Gray Coat Army. I haven't come up with a bandit title yet. Forgive me. Tang In wasn't lying earlier. The last person who pointed at him was Quincy at the publicity party. In the end, he broke his finger. Now, it was just a simple upgrade. As for why he was here, it was easy to understand. Tang In and the others had expected that the bandits would gather to discuss how to deal with the Gray Coat Army. After all, this was the easiest way to think of. The key was to find out early and take precautions. Reality proved that they were lucky. When they were clearing out a bandit stronghold, they bumped into a bandit leader who had received an invitation but had yet to depart. After that, they naturally came to take a look. The outer door of the hall was tightly shut. It should have been very warm inside. However, the people here were like frozen popsicles. It was as if they were in the middle of winter and had jumped into a lake. TSK. Seeing that there was no response, Tang In raised his eyebrows and took out an exquisite crossbow. Whoosh! Whoosh! Tables flipped and chairs fell. Weapons were unsheathed. Reality proved that from extreme stillness to extreme movement, 1 second was enough. Fortunately, there were only bandit leaders here, and none of those noble ladies who would scream and faint at the slightest provocation. Otherwise, this place would be even more lively. Don't get too excited. I haven't even loaded the arrow yet. Tang In looked at the people around him who were constantly retreating while waving their weapons to protect their vitals. He shrugged and casually took out a crossbow arrow that was a few inches long and installed it. Hey, it's already loaded. Oh, so it's because of you. TSK. Your reaction is not bad. You actually loaded it faster than me. Beside Tang In, a young man with a handsome face about 10 years old was also holding a crossbow. His attitude was different from Tang In's casual and natural attitude. He was currently staring at his surroundings with hatred in his eyes, as if he would pull the trigger at any time. Needless to say, at this age, she was naturally the little Carol who was determined to kill all the bandits and bandits. Papa, the monotonous applause came from the front. Bruno clapped his hands and stood up from his seat. His complexion had recovered quite a bit. Good, what guts? It's just SOSO. Tang In chuckled twice, then shook the crossbow in his hand. You guys are not bad either. You didn't even bat an eyelid when a crossbow was pointed at you. Bruno didn't look at the crossbow. Instead, he stared at Tang In and said, "To be honest, I'm really curious. You're so calm. Do you think you can still escape today?" "Of course. Who wants to die if they can live?" Tang In shrugged nonchalantly, then raised the crossbow. "Besides, don't I have this here? It's quite powerful." After saying that, the crossbow turned and swayed around. The bandit leaders were a little nervous, and their defenses were tighter. "Huh." Bruno laughed heartily and nodded. "I admire your sense of humor, but this is as far as I can go." Before he could finish his sentence, tot whoosh, hua, roar, swish swish, hiss hiss, because it was so close, everyone could even hear the vibration of the bowstring. Their hearts sank, and they didn't have time to think. Each of them unleashed their life-saving skills. In a split second, the hall was filled with colorful fighting energy. Then, all kinds of weapons were waved like fans, and the blades flashed, but whether it was the roars of the crowd or the weapons that pierced through the air, they were all covered by a powerful sound. Boom, waves of air rolled, and stones and wood flew everywhere. Under this kind of power, the main entrance of the hall, along with a few guards outside, was directly blasted into pieces, revealing the ink-like night sky outside. Hey, you see that?" Tang In retracted the crossbow that was aimed in the direction of the main entrance. He had a smug look on his face. "Everyone says that this crossbow is very powerful, but you guys don't believe it." Bruno's expression finally changed. He took a closer look at the arrow that Tang In had reloaded. "This is an ordinary arrow. You put an explosive crystal there. You're quite smart." Tang In raised his eyebrows and praised. Then he shook the crossbow. "But that's not the complete answer, because it's not only in that place." Whoosh! As soon as he finished speaking, the expressions of the surrounding bandit leaders changed drastically. They all widened their eyes and checked their surroundings. To be honest, although the crossbow was very powerful at close range, but for some bandit leaders with mid-level fighting energy, it was not much of a problem. The reason why they did not attack Tang In just now was that this was the territory of the Gale bandit gang. Naturally, it was not their turn to deal with this kind of thing. But now, the situation was different. Even if they had fighting energy armor to protect their bodies, it was very likely that they would die if they were hit by an explosive crystal in such an enclosed environment. They could not help but be nervous. "Little Carol, there are so many people there. I really want to come over." "And did you put it?" No. You're really inexperienced. Don't you know that people like to hide in corners when they're in danger?" There must be some here." Naturally, no one would pay attention to a child in a banquet-like occasion like before. After the surrounding bandit leaders heard the muttering of these two people, they all understood that the explosive crystal was placed by this bitter and vengeful child. Some people who were guessing where it was placed were suddenly at a loss. Damn it, they did not understand the world of children. How could they guess? For a moment, looking at these two people who were constantly pointing at each other, even if everyone knew that the other party might be having a bad taste, their hearts could not help but twitch along with them. They were completely unable to put their thoughts to rest. At this moment, a blue saber light instantly exploded with the force of thunder and went straight for Tang In's back. It was the guard who was standing behind Breno. Seeing that Tang In's back was facing him, he decisively made his move. This saber did not contain much fighting energy, but the key was that it was fast. After all, as long as it pierced the heart, it did not matter how much fighting energy there was. Haha, it hit. The eyes of the bandit leaders were as wide as copper bells. They saw the swift saber pierce through Tang In's back with their own eyes. However, before the joy in their hearts could be transmitted to their faces, they realized that the guard's figure could not stop and had also passed through Tang In. Then, he froze in a charging posture with a saber in front of them. A gap made by a saber would definitely not be able to pass through a living person. This was a principle that everyone understood. Hiss, 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 a red line suddenly appeared on the guard's neck. Then blood spurted out like a small fountain. In the quiet environment, the sound was like the sound of the wind, extremely pleasant to the ears. Bang! Under the stunned gazes of the bandit leaders, Tang In, who had dodged and attacked at some point, took a few steps forward and kicked the guard down. He looked very disdainful. Of all the things to play, you just had to play a sneak attack. Of all the things to learn, you just had to learn to be an assassin. I'm really defeated by you. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 312. The failure of the guard's assassination caused the atmosphere in the hall, which had not yet warmed up, to turn solemn once again. The bandit leaders looked at the arrogant Tang in the hall and were terrified and had a headache. This fellow was like a ticking time bomb, and it would be fine if that was all there was to it. After all, not everyone could overlook everything with an explosive crystal, just like how the guard chose to kill Tang and ignored little Carol. Although the item was equally dangerous, the key still depended on who had it. The cruel reality now was that not only did Tang have a powerful weapon, but his strength was also not bad. A cold wind blew in from the exploded door. The bandits nearby heard the explosion and quickly gathered. However, the people inside naturally could not let them in. With a wave of their hands, the bandits raised their weapons and completely blocked the door. You have guts and good skills. In the hall filled with a strange atmosphere, Breno narrowed his eyes and spoke again. You should be considered a figure in the Gray Coat Army. Unfortunately, you come to the wrong place today. With that, he waved his hand. The guards scattered in the hall carefully kicked away the obstacles and slowly approached. Obviously, after the failed sneak attack, Breno was ready to attack by force. This was the Gale bandit gang's encampment, his territory. No matter what, Breno would not allow outsiders to behave atrociously here. TSK, you have guts. Tang first gave him a thumbs up, then extended his index finger and pointed at the surrounding bandit leaders. But don't you plan to care about their lives? Huh. Breno looked up to the sky and laughed. He glanced at Tang. What a joke. Do you think these instigation methods will still work? The bandit leaders groaned in their hearts. To be honest, if they were in Breno's position, they would definitely make the same choice now. However, when they were the victims, it was inevitable that they would criticize him. However, they knew that this decision could not be reversed. Now, they could only aim at the exit and be more cautious in their defense. Tang nodded in understanding. Then, he touched his chin and muttered softly. In that case, it's about time. About time? Breno was stunned at first. Then he seemed to have thought of something, and his face turned a little ugly. Tang spread out his hands and chuckled. You're so smart. Why don't you take a guess? Ha! Boom, boom, boom. His laughter had barely faded when a blaze of fire soared into the sky from the door. Then, a thunderous sound came from afar. The hall was silent at first, and then all kinds of chaos broke out instantly. Let's go. Tang spread out his hands, and the two axes at his waist flew up while spinning. Over there was the hanging light of the hall. Damn it, do it. At the same time, Bruno roared and pounced forward. He had a bad premonition just now, as if he had overlooked something. Now he understood that the reason why Tang was dawdling here was to stall for time. Others might not know where the huge explosion came from, but he knew very well that it came from the direction of the gate of the stronghold. Bang, crash, the light dimmed and dimmed. Tiny pieces of glass sparkled with colorful light and fell down like raindrops. The hanging light in the middle of the hall was not the only light source, but there was no doubt that it was the main source of light. Now that it was accurately hit by the axes, everyone present felt their vision darken instantly. The guards who were closest to it and were madly pouncing forward suddenly realized that they had lost their target in this moment of darkness. Gate, gate. The sudden shout came from the bandit leader closest to the gate. These people were all smart. When the hall suddenly changed, they immediately chose to rush to the gate. However, someone was faster than them. A gust of wind blew past, and with the help of the dim light, they saw the back of Tang carrying the young man. Block it. Attack, attack. I can't see clearly, it's too fast. I'll block it. Bang. Ah. The sound of weapons clashing, the sound of tables and chairs collapsing and shattering, and the screams and groans were incessant. The entire hall seemed to be on the verge of collapse under the flickering lights. Despite the dangerous and chaotic environment, The bandit leaders all licked their lips and stopped in their tracks. Just one person could actually turn the fierce-gale bandit gang's hall into such a mess. What a clumsy and laughable scene. Breno had just killed his way to the center of the hall. When he heard the chaos at the gate, the anger in his heart rushed to his head. Bang! A figure who had scurried in front of him was sent flying with a kick. His eyes were bloodshot, and he stepped on the shattered lights. His body was about to roll forward like a gust of wind. Before he could exert any strength in his leg, a black shadow flashed in front of Breno. He glanced over and saw a bunch of red diamond-shaped objects tied to a rope swinging around. Explode, crystals? Whoosh, as the light and darkness changed. A crossbow arrow was shot from the front. The momentum was just enough to hit the swinging crystals. Breno suddenly looked up. A frosty little face with a slight smile flashed by the door. It was that kid. Darkness. Retreat. Explode, explode. Boom, boom, boom. At this moment, the fierce-gale bandit gang's encampment was also in chaos. After the gate was blown up, rows of fully armed soldiers flooded in. The bandits were caught off guard and fell into a passive situation. A large-scale bandit gang, like the fierce-gale bandit gang, had a few layers of defense on the periphery. But now they were being killed right in front of their eyes without a sound. And their F*King gate was blown up. It was obvious that these invading soldiers had a plan. After quickly breaking through the first layer of defense, they spread out in a fan shape and went straight into the center of the stronghold, intercepting the bandits' reinforcements. After that, the soldiers who swarmed in forced their way through the middle, looking like they wanted to split the stronghold into several pieces. Suddenly facing such a powerful attack, the bandits did not receive any authoritative orders. They were a little confused for a moment. In the end, they could only fight their own battles and leave it to their own devices. Regular army. They are regular army. In the dim environment, coupled with the opponent's standard armor and clear and decisive tactical intent, the bandits only thought that the brand's regular army had charged in. Trembling in fear, before the bandits could recover, the stronghold behind them began to light up again. In the dark night, there was no telling how many people had snuck in. The flames that soared into the sky, the noisy noise, the messy defense. It could be said that the scales of this battle had been tilted from the beginning. But that was how war was. There was no fairness, only victory and defeat. Kill. We can't hold on any longer. Reinforcements. Where's the boss? Where's the boss? Boom. The earth shook, the mountains shook, and the moon and stars fell. In an instant, the sounds of fighting stopped. The explosions had not stopped since the beginning, and there was nothing strange about it. But the intensity of the explosions this time was too strong, almost comparable to the explosion of the stronghold's gate. Everyone turned their heads and saw that in the middle of the stronghold, a wave of air shot up into the sky, and broken objects were scattered everywhere. Then, the wind pressure wreaked havoc in all directions, and the bonfire not far away was instantly pressed into a 90-degree angle. After a short pause, the sounds of fighting on the battlefield rang out again. But at this time, the bandits were a little hesitant. Of course, they knew what kind of place it was, not to mention the 100 or so bandit leaders who had attended the gathering. Even their boss was still inside. In the center of the stronghold, where the hall used to be, the effects of the explosion had passed, but the rising stone dust and fog had not completely dissipated. Vaguely, one could see that the buildings here had been completely flattened, and all kinds of broken fences and walls were scattered everywhere. Dozens of bandits were moaning and lying dozens of meters away. Needless to say, they were the group that had blocked the gate earlier. The center of the explosion was in the middle of the hall, and everyone inside was caught in one fell swoop. The bandit leaders who were near the gate did not manage to escape because the gate was in chaos at that time, and the bandits attacked indiscriminately in the dark. This level of explosion in such a sealed space. Even an intermediate warrior with battle energy armor would have a slim chance of survival. Boss! Amidst the shouts, hundreds of bandits ran around and searched the messy field. The 100,000 Mountains was not a kind place. The bandit leaders who had attended the gathering naturally brought people here, but these people were left outside. Now that they saw the hall explode, they naturally searched for it with tears in their eyes. Of course, there were more Gale bandits here. Not long after, all kinds of broken armor, broken limbs, and so on were turned over. Some were grieving, some were worried. Broken limbs and the like were not easy to identify, but some special armor could still be distinguished. Not long after, a few bandits began to hold the broken armor and wail loudly. Those who were brought out by the leader were naturally his trusted subordinates, and after interacting with them for a long time, they had accumulated some feelings. Those who had not been found were somewhat glad, but their worry did not disappear. After all, with such a powerful explosion, it was easy to imagine that they would be blown to pieces. At this moment, bang, a blue light shot into the sky, and a pile of broken rocks and wood at the back was forcefully blown away. Then, a figure slowly stood up. The blue battle-chi armor that was almost solid shone brightly in the night. However, this light did not last for long. After a few breaths, the light dimmed, and the battle energy armor disappeared. Taking a step forward, his body swayed, and he staggered as if he was about to fall. "Boss!" Amidst the surprised shouts, dozens of figures instantly came over. Needless to say, such a formation could only belong to the leader of the Gale Bandits, Bruno. From the strength of the battle energy armor, just now, it could be seen that Bruno's strength was at least high. Only people with such strength could survive such an explosion and muster enough strength to force their way out. Even so, Bruno's current situation could be said to be miserable. His hair was disheveled, his clothes were ragged, and his face was bleeding. That originally domineering and awe-inspiring image of the Gale Bandits' leader was gone forever. Now, he looked more like a beggar on the side of the road. Chapter 313. Although he had escaped death, Bruno couldn't feel happy at all. This was originally a rare opportunity, a meticulously planned plan to raise fierce wind to the top bandit group in the 100,000 Mountains. But now, the bandit leaders who came were all buried under the rubble, and it was unknown whether they were dead or alive. Not to mention the huge impact this brought. Now, his Mother * King stronghold was also under attack, and with a glance, there were flames everywhere, and it was chaos. All right, now wasn't the time to talk about this. Shaking his head and pushing away the subordinates who were supporting him, Bruno said in a dignified voice, "Don't panic. What's the situation now?" This attitude wasn't for show, but Bruno knew very well that bandits weren't soldiers. Once they were at a disadvantage, they would collapse easily. If he didn't stabilize and become stronger now, this bandit group that he had painstakingly built for decades would really be destroyed. It's the regular army. They have already broken in, and more than half of the stronghold's front has been taken down. There are also some people setting fire everywhere, creating chaos. "Boss, our brothers can't hold on much longer," a bandit reported with a long face. "Regular army my ass, it's the gray coat army." "Damn it," Bruno roared with a gloomy face, and then his heart started to sink. When he heard the explosion at the stronghold's entrance, he had already predicted the worst-case scenario, but now that he heard the actual situation, he still felt dizzy. No matter if it was a stronghold or a city, the main defense was at the entrance. But now the stronghold's entrance had actually been taken down. How could he deal with this? Gritting his teeth, Bruno said fiercely, "Pass down my order. Tell our brothers to stop attacking. Abandon the stronghold and quickly retreat to various hiding spots." The surrounding bandits opened their mouths in shock and stood rooted to the ground. The stronghold was the foundation of a bandit group, and bandits without the stronghold were just bandits. Although there were prepared locations, the location and defense facilities there couldn't be compared to here. Moreover, this stronghold had piled up the things they had robbed over the years, and if they retreated now, they definitely wouldn't have the time to transport everything away, and this would be a huge loss. What the F*** are you guys still standing here for? Do you want to die here? Get the hell out of here and pass down the order. Bruno waved his arms, and roared loudly. There is no doubt that Breno's heart was bleeding when he made such a decision. However, he knew that if they didn't leave now, none of them would be able to leave once the Grey Coat army completely surrounded the stronghold. Those worldly possessions were important, but his life was even more important. As long as they were still alive, the Gale Bandit gang would have a chance to make a comeback. Otherwise, everything would be nonsense. Yes, yes, boss. The bandits around him regained their senses and immediately nodded in response before dispersing in all directions. Phew. Brenner exhaled deeply, turning to look at the other bandits who were searching everywhere, hugging their heads and crying, as well as the chaotic battlefield in the distance. He shook his head. All his efforts had been for naught. Grey Coat army. Just you wait. Bruno, am not done with you. Breno clenched his fists, turned around, and staggered a step, but his body was immediately supported. Breno turned his head in surprise and was immediately enraged. Why aren't you informing them? The person beside him was dressed in a bandit outfit. He was one of the people who had surrounded Breno earlier. However, he didn't leave and was now eagerly supporting Brenner. However, it was obvious that his flattery had hit the nail on the head. I'm here to send you off. Send you off? Get lost. Brenner, whose heart was burning with rage, naturally wasn't in the mood to respond. However, in an instant his body trembled and he suddenly turned his head. Kiss. A cold and elegant blade light danced lightly, seemingly slow but actually fast. It was like the tail of a lover's hair, brushing past his neck with the most careless gentleness. I'm saying to send you off. A faint sigh. The long and narrow eyes on his face that was covered in soot seemed especially cold and emotionless. Roar. Brenner roared angrily, blue fighting aura erupting in an instant, radiating all around him. In a narrow space, a fist with the force of 1,000 caddies smashed out heavily. Unfortunately, the opponent had already stepped to the side and easily dodged it. Puff. Brenner staggered half a step forward from his own all-out punch. Bang. He half-knelt on the ground, his right hand subconsciously touching his neck. He panted a few times, and a wet scarlet liquid flowed out from between his fingers. Good. Huff. I was careless. You have guts. Dying at your hands is not an injustice. Darkness gradually eroded his vision, and the blue light disappeared. Brenner was like a dying beast, staring at the blurry figure in front of him, panting laboriously. The figures gradually became pairs, then 4, then 8. Not a single one could be seen. The night came. Thank you for the compliment. He bowed halfway, and then straightened his body. Whoosh, tang, and whistled casually, opened a cloth bag, and walked towards Brenner's corpse. Boss, damn it, you dare. Kill him. The assassination happened in an instant and was simple and unadorned. The bandits who were about to pass on the order hadn't gone far when they heard Brenner's dying roar, and they all turned around. However, all they saw was their boss's collapsed figure, and another person walked over, crouched down, and put a cloth bag over their boss's head, then raised a dagger. The head of the bandit group's leader was to be used as evidence for others to see, so naturally they had to come and retrieve it. Otherwise, without a head, there would be no truth. Of course, like Black Fox, who had been ravaged by several women, that was a special case. Even the bones had been crushed, so how could they retrieve it? Before the bandits could get close, they saw that the other party had already finished, lifted the cloth bag, tied it tightly, and even waved at them before disappearing into the ruins. The bandits were enraged, howling at the sky as they charged forward. They couldn't help but be angry. To be honest, they couldn't believe that their powerful boss had been assassinated so easily. One had to know that they didn't even have time to see the process clearly. And now, even his head had been cut off? What are you howling for? It's so late at night. Don't you have any civility? Someone mocked. At some point in time, a muscular man appeared from the ruins. David, you're imitating our boss's tone again. A slightly plump figure flashed like a cat, and then mocked mercilessly, "But our boss is cool. You're just being pretentious." "Agreed." "Seconded." The bandits stopped in their tracks and looked at the 7 or 8 figures who had suddenly appeared and surrounded them. *T. The bandits came to their senses. They had just received Breno's order to retreat. If they were to be blocked now, for some reason, everyone suddenly realized that the Gale Bandit Guild would really be annihilated. "That's enough." David waved his hand angrily. "Hurry up and do it. When Michaud and the others arrive, they'll take away our credit." Before he could finish his sentence, David's jaw dropped in shock as he saw a short figure rushing towards the bandits with a large, symbolic scythe raised high up in the air. "Oh my God. What the hell are you waiting for? Go." Chapter 314. This night was especially long. In a certain valley in the 100,000 mountains, the ground was in a mess. The wails of cold-signal birds echoed in the air, adding to the loneliness. Black smoke rose into the air and was blown away by the wind, merging into the boundless curtain. The night was even darker. This battle of over 10,000 bandits did not last long, especially after the bandit leader was killed. The bandits' morale quickly collapsed. Coupled with the fact that they missed the best time to retreat, they were completely surrounded by the Gray Coat army. At that time, the bandits were running around like headless flies. Some were lucky enough to run into the mountains and escape, but most of them were killed by the shiny sabers. In this battle, the fierce Wind Bandit gang was wiped out, and the stronghold was destroyed. The Gray Coat army was naturally celebrating. A large bandit gang and more than 100 bandit leaders were annihilated. It was not an exaggeration to say that this was a one-off battle. More importantly, they had also gained a lot this time. The fierce Wind Bandit gang had stood tall in the 100,000 mountains for decades. They had robbed countless caravans, and the gold, silver, treasures, food, equipment, and so on were almost all calculated in warehouses. In fact, the battle only took half a night. The rest of the night was spent cleaning up the battlefield and transporting the spoils. While they returned with a bountiful harvest, the news spread like wildfire. Although the fierce Wind Bandit gang was not a top bandit gang, it was still one of the top in the 100,000 mountains. It was only one step away from the top of the pyramid. Naturally, there were people who paid attention to its every move, and some of the bandits who had escaped last night. Before dawn, the news had spread everywhere. Like a sudden clap of thunder on a spring day, the 100,000 mountains shook. To be honest, the bandits' impression of the Gray Coat army was still at the beginning. They were a group of tens of thousands, dragging their families and being run around by the brand's regular army all day long. This was also the reason why they were not willing to move away, even though they knew that many of their peers had been wiped out. But now, in just one night, the fierce Wind Bandit gang, which had close to 10,000 members, was annihilated. Even the head of their leader was taken away. Was this really the work of the Gray Coat army? It wasn't that one of the Empire's main forces had been transferred back. The shock did not end there. As the content of the news continued to increase, the situation of the previous night was gradually restored. The bandits were shocked to discover that it wasn't just the fierce Gale bandit group that had been eliminated. More than 100 bandit leaders had also been eliminated. It was supposed to be a gathering to discuss how to deal with the Gray Coat army, but it ended up being wiped out. An organization like a bandit group was different from an army. If the general died, the deputy general would take over. It could be said that as long as the leader died, the bandit group would most likely fall apart. It wasn't that there weren't any assistants. The key was whether they were convinced or not. As long as they had some strength, who wouldn't want to be the boss? After a series of internal strife, even if they did not disperse, their vitality would be greatly damaged. From the looks of it, the Gray Coat army's battle was even more shocking. They had practically destroyed over 100 bandit groups in a single night. After receiving the complete information, the remaining bandit groups no longer dared to hesitate. They didn't even have time to eat breakfast as they packed up and moved together. As a result, the 100,000 mountains became lively. There was no need to mention the commotion caused by the relocation. The key was that there were only so many places suitable for robbery and hiding, and they had to eliminate the places occupied by the big shots. Under such circumstances, they naturally had to follow the rules of the underworld. Whoever had the bigger fist would occupy the place. Putting aside how intense the battle was at the 100,000 Mountains, a few days later, the news spread to the various cities and caused an uproar. Actually, it shouldn't have caused such a stir. The citizens had almost become used to seeing the bandit names constantly appear on the publicity paper these past few days. However, the key was that the official newspaper, after a period of silence, once again threw out a new argument. Although the Gray Coat Army had announced a lot of names, in reality, they were all small fish and shrimps that weren't worth mentioning. Unexpectedly, in less than 2 days, they were slapped in the face again. The Fierce Gale Bandit Group was a small fish and shrimps? Besides, even if they were small fish and shrimps, how many had Bran eliminated over the years? Needless to say, in the face of these doubts, the official newspaper once again chose to be silent. Speaking of which, the editors of the newspaper were also frustrated. With Bran's strength, it was not a big problem for him to wipe out the bandits. Although it was difficult to find a place to hide, he could still catch some of them if he cast a large net. However, the key was that Bran had never paid attention to it in the past. Now that he realized that the Gray Coat Army was using this to publicize, he couldn't pay attention to it even if he wanted to. This was because they were currently at war with the Northern Wilderness, so they naturally didn't have the time to eliminate the bandits behind them. Therefore, after some hesitation, the official newspaper simply ignored it and posted the list of bandits that the regular army had eliminated in the past. Of course, at this time, they didn't care if there were small fish and shrimps on it. However, just because the government didn't take it seriously didn't mean that the public didn't. After Bruno's head was transported to the entrance of a nearby city, the city was completely in an uproar and held another big carnival. Of course, the Gray Coat Army in the mountains didn't know about these things. They were now happily digesting the Fierce Gale Bandit Gang's inheritance. Speaking of which, the Fierce Gale Bandit Gang didn't work in vain all these years. Just the food that was transported back had temporarily solved the urgent needs of the Gray Coat Army. Other similar weapons and armors had also greatly supplemented the military's needs. Among them, what made Rosa and the others the happiest were the 10 medium-sized city-guarding crossbows. These defensive weapons were originally placed on top of the Fierce Gale Bandit Gang's gate, but because of the sudden attack, they were all seized without even shooting an arrow. Needless to say, they were just right to be used to set up the newly built city walls. In the end, it was the boxes of gold and silver that were the most difficult to deal with. These were all dirty goods, so the only way to deal with them was to scatter them like Tang did last time. However, the problem was that there were too many things in front of them. If they wanted to scatter them without attracting attention, it would take a long time. Although it was a little troublesome, these were all happy troubles. After seeing this harvest, Rosa and the other higher-ups were shocked and moved. They wanted to make a move on other large bandit gangs. Of course, this was just a thought. It was undoubtedly unrealistic to carry out such a battle operation again. The Fierce Gale Bandit Gang was courting death. Otherwise, the Gray Coat Army might not have touched them. Moreover, they had a good reason to fight the Fierce Gale Bandit Gang. After all, they were working together to secretly deal with the Gray Coat Army. It was not suitable to fight other bandit gangs. Moreover, in the end, this was just a war for the sake of proving one's name. Moreover, large or even top bandit gangs had a huge appeal. This could be seen from Brenner's gathering of more than 100 bandit leaders at once. Once they were forced into a corner and felt that they were cold without lips and teeth, they would join forces to resist. Then, the Gray Coat Army would probably be flustered first. This was a problem of degree. If they went too far, it would be harmful. Rosa and the others were also clear in their hearts, so in the end, they shook their heads regretfully and sighed. As for the gray space, Tang went deep into the bandit stronghold to deal with them and personally beheaded Brenner. It could be said that he had contributed greatly. David and the others created chaos everywhere, laying the foundation for a surprise attack. The group of elite soldiers also showed their faces. They were the ones who blew up the bandit stronghold door. It could be considered a good start. Among them, Taitan and the others were praised by old Marshal Omeng and were awarded medals. As for Tang, In, and the others, Rosa dismissed them with a sentence. Their contributions were great, but there was no reward. If they really wanted to go find Zhuo Fan themselves, naturally, Tang In was not satisfied with such an outcome. Zhuo Fan had said in advance that the Fierce Gale Bandit Gang was involved in an unexpected incident, so they should be rewarded separately. Moreover, if they were not willing, it was fine to give more soldiers pay. It was not that they lacked money. According to Tang In's words, this was not a matter of money. All right, Tang In was indeed embarrassingly short of money now. The ring that Alan gave him was like an unlimited credit card, but the key was that the Grey Coat Army's new city did not have an ATM either. As the city began to take shape, some business-minded people pooled their money to build some new taverns and shops. Although there were not many shops, it still looked like a city. Previously, when Fei Rue treated Tang In to a drink, he bought it here. Rosa and the others naturally supported this kind of business development and gave them preferential policies as encouragement. However, doing business was naturally not the same as before. They had to pay to eat and drink here. Tang In's group of friends, Fry, Taitan, Fei Rue, and the others, were all poor. Speaking of which, Tang In was still the richest. Following the logic of bandits, whenever Fry and the others wanted a drink, they would ask Tang In to pay the bill. Moreover, since it was drinking, you could not just treat one person, right? Like David and the others, those elite soldiers, Frey's subordinates. In just a short period of 10 days, Tang In felt a lot of pressure. Sai, you don't have to do this. Rosa sat behind his desk, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. He looked at Tang, who was sitting on the side, and refused to leave. The soldier's pay in the gray space is not low, and it has only been a few days. This was the truth. Ever since the kidnapping and extortion of the old noble, the Grey Coat Army's luck seemed to have taken a turn for the better. They had made a lot of money, especially when they destroyed the dozens of knights' manors. Therefore, the soldiers' pay in the past few months had been in full. The gray space enjoyed the treatment of a regiment, so the soldiers' pay was indeed not low. However, this was only paid once a month. It was simply a drop in the bucket. Ahem, let me emphasize again, this is not a matter of money. Tang In touched his nose and said with a serious face, "You should be rewarded for your contributions. This is a matter of principle. TSK, this has risen to the level of principle." Rosa smacked his lips, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. "Well, in that case, I could give you some reward funds." Tang In was stunned. Of course, he knew Rosa's character. It could be said that he was similar to him. They were both masters who would not act without seeing the incentive. But now he agreed so easily. But, dragging out the last word, Luo Sha narrowed her eyes and smiled. "This money is not for free. I happen to have a small matter. Can you help me with it?" "Sure enough. Waiting for me here. This is the real Rosa." Tang In sighed in his heart. Then he straightened his back and asked cautiously, "Tell me what is first." He did not believe that Rosa would say that it was a small matter and that he would just do it casually. "Hey, what kind of attitude is this? Don't worry, it is really a small matter for you." He in a small matter? Chapter 315. The next morning, in a tavern, Tang In sat in the corner of the hall, sipping his ale. Due to the time constraints, there weren't many customers. The tables and chairs, however, were all newly made. There was a faint smell of wood in the air. This tavern was one of the first to open in the new city. The owner was called Old Wood. He used to be a soldier in the Grey Coat Army. He even held the position of squadron leader. However, he was injured in a battle and lost his left leg, so he retired. Fortunately, he still had his family's brewing skills, so he pooled his money to open this tavern. This was also the place Tang In frequented the most. The reason was that Old Wood's ale was unique and spicy. Fry and the others liked it. As for Tang In, he didn't like or dislike this kind of taste. Every time he came, he only came to pay. Bang! The wooden door of the tavern was pushed open. "Haha, good morning, Old Wood." A young man with freckles walked in and greeted the black-bearded Old Wood, who was sitting behind the liquor cabinet. "Good morning, Fei Rue." Old Wood looked up and nodded with a smile. After greeting him, Fei Rue looked around and saw Tang in sitting in the corner. He shrugged and walked over. I'm confused. Do you like sitting in the corner that much? You sit here every time you come. Haha, it's just a habit. Tang in pushed another jar of ale over and smiled casually. A habit sounds like an expert. Fei Rue lifted the tarp on the jar and raised his eyebrows with interest. You're observing, right? More or less. Tang in nodded his head non-committally, then reached out and handed the jar over. Dong! The low-quality jar made a dull sound. Fei Rue tilted his head back and took a big gulp before wiping his mouth. So, you can remember everything you see? Not to that extent. Tang in shook his head. I see. Fei Rue tilted his head and stared into Tang In's eyes. Let's have an appetizer. How many people are there? 7. Tang In answered without hesitation. Fei Rue looked around and shrugged. It seemed a little too simple. Do you remember what they ordered? Tang In pretended to be bored as he shook the wine jar and said flatly, out of the 4 guests, 2 of them came together. They're just drinking ale like us. The other ordered bread and a glass of fruit wine for breakfast. As for the man behind you, he asked for a jug of ale and a plate of beef. Yes, he should be eating the last piece of beef now. As Tang In listed out the items ordered by the guests, Fei Rue's eyes gradually widened, and his face was filled with surprise. When he heard the last sentence, he turned around and saw a burly man sitting behind him. Although the man's back was facing Fei Rue could see the man's cheeks moving as if he was chewing something. After swallowing the food in his mouth, the burly man drank the last mouthful of wine in the jar and left his seat. Old Wood, the bill. Fei Rue blinked. There was only a knife and fork on the empty plate on the table next to him. From the red shreds of meat left on the plate, it was clear that this was the beef from here. He turned his head and said in disbelief, How did you know that was the last piece? Fei Rue had been staring at Tang In's eyes just now to make sure that his eyeballs didn't move. Even if he saw something else, perhaps his memory was really good. But how could he know that the burly man with his back turned was eating the last piece of beef? It's very simple. Tang In sipped his wine casually. If you pay attention, you'll know that Old Wood always has 18 slices of beef on his plate. Fei Rue opened his mouth and was speechless. When he came back to his senses, he raised his thumb and sighed. Amazing, I'm impressed. He paused, shook his head, and said, I suddenly feel that being your enemy is really a scary thing. Huh? He shook his head and chuckled. There was no proud look on his face, and he didn't say much. In Tang In's opinion, this was not something to be proud of. To be honest, he didn't want to remember or observe these things. They were just instincts. Or rather, it was just like how he chose to sit in the corner every time. It was completely out of habit. It had to be said that under the influence of the system space, Tang In had changed a lot. The instinctive habits of an assassin had been deeply imprinted on every inch of his bones and blood. Of course, this didn't mean that Tang In could remember everything. In a complex environment, things like the ones mentioned just now that weren't dangerous would be automatically filtered out. If he wanted to remember them again, he would have to slowly recall them. Okay. After drinking a few mouthfuls of wine, Fei Rue quickly adjusted his mood and looked up. Tell me, why did you ask me to come here? There's no rush. You haven't eaten yet, right? Why don't you order something to fill your stomach first? Tang In smirked and waved to the counter. Old Wood, 2 cheeses, 2 plates of beef, 1 plate. In just a few seconds, Tang In skillfully ordered a lot of things. You don't have to be so dramatic. Fei Rue touched his hair and said in surprise, It's so early in the morning. Can you finish all this? Tang In waved his hand casually. If I can't finish it, I can take it away. Come, let's drink first. There weren't many customers in the tavern, so the food was served very quickly. Not long after, a rather clever waiter brought the food Tang In ordered one by one. After eating some food, Tang In licked his lips in satisfaction and said, Do you still remember? I once said that I would give you some credit. Of course. Fei Rue nodded without hesitation and smiled. Although my memory isn't as crazy as yours, I won't forget such a beneficial thing. Why? Is the credit coming? Yes. Tang In nodded. The leader has decided to purchase a batch of heavy city defense equipment to arm the city. I recommended you. Tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock, you will set off with us. This was the favor that Rosa had asked Tang on to help him with yesterday. This city, which had been internally named the City of Dawn, had basically been completed. Although it was a little rushed, the next thing to do was to install the city defense equipment. After all, no one knew when the brand officials would discover this place. When that time came, a huge battle would be unavoidable. Although they had seized more than 10 city defense crossbows from the Gale bandits, it was far from enough to deploy the city defense equipment. It could be said that the current City of Dawn had no defensive capabilities other than the city walls. Coincidentally, the Grey Coat Army had made a fortune recently, so Rosa and the rest decided to invest in the purchase. However, these items were definitely prohibited and could not be bought with money. The key was to find the right place. And this was the mission of Twain and the others. Fei Rue opened his mouth wide in surprise. He then excitedly clenched his fist. This is great. I finally have a chance to shine. Thank you, Tang Yin. I will remember this favor for the rest of my life. Purchasing city defense equipment was a big deal. As long as it was done well, it would definitely be a great opportunity to gain credit. However, because of this, a small soldier like Fei Rue, who had just joined the military logistics department, should not have been qualified to join. A lifetime is too long. I have to seize every moment. Tang In rubbed his chin and pointed at the table. He smiled and said, "Let's settle this later." Fei Rue was stunned at first, but he quickly recovered. He looked at the sumptuous dishes on the table and suddenly felt bitter. Tang In, you tricked me. TSK, don't say that. Tang In smacked his lips and shook his finger. I'm celebrating for you. That's why I ordered so much. Yes, we should celebrate. We should celebrate my official bankruptcy. After he finished speaking, Fei Rue did not say anything else. He buried his head in his mouth and ate. It was as if he was trying to minimize his losses. F***CK, eat less. I still have to take it away later. Boo-hoo, I'll spit on your face. Don't even think about it. F***CK. You have to put the plate on the table. Chapter 3:16. Frost and dew had yet to dry, and a night wind was blowing at dawn. No one knew how long it had been in the mountains. It was probably July or August now. Actually, it was a stupid question to worry about the season in the north, especially in the 100,000 mountains, where the wind was bitterly cold all year round. The so-called change of seasons was just a matter of how cold the wind was. Of course, not all places in the 100,000 mountains were like this. Otherwise, the farmers wouldn't be able to grow crops. For example, they could still grow crops if they found a place that faced the sun. However, the harvest would be less. This was also one of the reasons why the poor people in the north had a harder time than the south. Perhaps this was also the reason why the northern wilderness barbarians kept trying to invade the Bran Empire. However, no matter what, it was like the sun rising from the east and setting in the west. No matter how hard the days were, they still had to live. At the front line, the Bran soldiers and the northern wilderness barbarians were still fighting fiercely. Blood flowed like rivers. Overall, although the northern wilderness's offensive momentum had weakened, it still couldn't be suppressed. According to the occasional news from the city's secret organization, some villages and towns close to the front line had already begun to be attacked. As for the 100,000 mountains, the Grey Coat Army was still working hard to build their own homes and were gradually getting results. The bandits were also fighting fiercely. The scale was not as big as the front line, but the frequency was extremely high. Some of the bandit groups that were not built within 30 kilometers of the villages were dragged into the water. Snatching territory, snatching strongholds, guarding territory, guarding mountain strongholds. Every day, the roles were reversed. Some of the bandits were not even sure what they wanted to do. In the city, Josiah set up more and more secret organizations. First, it was the cities around the 100,000 mountains. Then, it gradually spread out with the intention of covering the entire north. In this way, the publicity area was naturally wider. Of course, this process was not smooth. Recently, the publicity department had been constantly recruiting people. Of course, there was a need for development, but there was also a need to replenish the manpower that was lost. Fortunately, this was mostly benign and could be looked forward to. After the official newspaper was slapped in the face a few times, it simply changed its strategy. It no longer focused on the bandits and focused on promoting the heroic deeds of the frontline soldiers. He also stood at the height of the country and strongly reprimanded the Gray Coat Army for causing trouble behind the scenes without regard for the enemy. It had to be said that this method of secretly changing concepts was a good entry point, and it also won some support. All in all, in this northern season, every person and every organization walked on the road according to their own interests. Similarly, Tang was also walking on the road. However, this was not a virtual one. It was a real and flat mountain road. There was no need to explain the reason. Naturally, it was because he had promised Rosa to go into the city to purchase goods. Captain Tang, we were still more than 5 kilometers away from Hanshui City. A young scout who had rushed back from afar said with a salute, "Well, thank you for your hard work." Tang nodded. He could not help but sigh in his heart. It was not easy, but they had finally arrived. They had already been walking for 4 days. If it weren't for the fact that they had horses, the time would have been twice as long. In fact, it was similar to the Riva city that was first advertised. It was closer to the Gray Coat Army's encampment and was only about 2 to 3 days away. However, after a discussion, the higher-ups of Rosa decided to purchase goods from Hanshui City, which was further away. As for the reason, of course, it was because they were worried that they could not buy all the prohibited goods in small and medium-sized cities. Hanshui City was different. It was one of the few large cities in the north. If they could not buy the goods here, it would be useless to go to other places. "All right," inform the others later. "We will enter the city in batches." It was a purchase, and it was such a big item. There were many aspects involved, so it was naturally not something that could be done by a few people. In fact, the Gray Coat Army had mobilized close to 200 people this time. Such an obvious target naturally needed to be scattered to avoid attracting attention. Yes, the young scout carefully looked at Tang. After confirming that there were no other orders, he turned around and left. The Gray Coat Army's reputation was very high in the military. Although it was not necessarily praise, no one could deny that their combat strength was indeed very strong. As a result, Tang, who had created this team, naturally became even more curious and talked about. In fact, in the military, the nature of a scout was the most similar to that of the Gray Coat Army. Therefore, it was not strange that the young scout was so careful around Tang. In fact, this kind of scouting work would have been more reassuring if David and the others were in charge. However, the matter with the 100,000 mountain bandits was not over yet. In addition, they were still being taught by Zhou Fan. Therefore, Tang did not bring them along this time. "Tang, are we almost there?" Fei Rui, whose face was slightly bruised, walked over from behind. His footsteps were light and his voice was weak. "Yes, there's still about 10 miles left." Tang turned around and shook his head when he saw Fei Rui's appearance. He reached out and patted his shoulder. "I say, you're too weak. You are a member of the military. How can you not know how to ride a horse?" "Hey, don't. Fei Rui's shoulders slumped as he hurriedly dodged Tang's hand. He then said awkwardly, "Isn't it because the road is too bumpy? Also, I know how to ride a horse now." "Ha, that's right." Tang touched his forehead as if he could not bear to look at Fei Rui. "I know. I thought you were riding a horse. If I didn't know, I would have thought that you had a deep grudge against this horse and wanted to strangle it to death." That was indeed the case. After setting off from the base, Tang realized that Fei Rui did not know how to ride a horse. However, the journey was long, and it was impossible to not ride a horse. Fei Rui was unwilling to go back and miss out on this opportunity. In the end, he gritted his teeth and rode on. Even though Tang did not hold back and imparted his experience to him, and even picked the most docile old horse for him, Fei Rui's outcome was still very, very tragic. Fei Rui's brain was indescribable. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was smart. He remembered all the experiences that Tang had told him. However, when it came to actual action, his limbs felt as if they were stuck with a strong spider web and became extremely stiff. Tang Yin sometimes suspected that if he did not watch over Fei Rue from the side, Fei Rue might have been trampled to death by the horse. Fortunately, the mountain road was rugged and the horse could not run fast. After a few days of bumping and falling, Fei Rue was finally able to stay on the horse's back. Take note, it was just stay on. As for the heroic riding posture, it had nothing to do with him at all. I finally made it. Even though Fei Rue was a little embarrassed by Tang Yin's words, he could not help but cheer when he confirmed that the destination was right in front of him. Tang Yin pursed his lips and said indifferently, "Don't be happy too early. Don't forget that you still have to make it back." Fei Rue's face froze when he heard that. Then he said angrily, "Tang Yin, didn't you say that I would die? Would I die?" Tang Yin opened his mouth and was about to speak. However, he raised his eyebrows and turned to look. At this moment, an old voice suddenly sounded. "Haha, what are you guys talking about? You look so happy." It was a curly-haired old man. When he came over, he obviously heard the cheers from before. However, when he saw Fei Rue's sad and angry expression, he could not help but feel a little puzzled. "Minister Bosco." Tang Yin narrowed his eyes and bowed simply. Fei Rue naturally could not do that. He bowed solemnly to greet him. The person who came was Bosco. The Gray Coat Army naturally needed a high-ranking official to oversee such a large purchase. Bosco used to be a noble and was knowledgeable. He also dabbled in such matters. Coupled with his rich negotiation experience, he was naturally the best choice. Bosco first nodded in return. Then, he waved his hand and said gently, "There's no need to be so polite when we're outside." Tang Yin did not respond. He just stood there silently. He did not have a good impression of Bosco. In the past few days, the two did not have any communication. To be honest, Tang Yin suspected that Bosco's death and the subsequent empty tomb were caused by him. This speculation was not unfounded. Although Borg had a motive and was smart enough, he definitely did not have such an experienced method and flawless post-event arrangement. Fei Rue saw that Tang Yin did not respond. His heart skipped a beat. The incident between Bosco and Tang Yin had long been spread in the station. Even Tang Yin had to bear a lot of infamy because of it. Fei Rue only thought that Tang Yin had a problem with the Bosco family because of it. He quickly stepped forward and took over the topic. Bosco's eyes flashed when he saw this, but he did not say anything. He chatted with Fei Rue as if he did not see it. Then, he casually asked, "Captain Tang Yin, are we arriving at the city soon?" With Bosco's identity in the Gray Coat Army, as long as Tang Yin had not officially fallen out with him, there was no way to avoid it. Therefore, even if Tang Yin did not think that Bosco did not know the results of the scouts' investigation, he still nodded and said lightly, "Yes, Minister, about 10 miles more." "Oh, finally, we're here." Bosco's face flashed a trace of fatigue. He reached out and pinched his waist. "It seems that I'm really old. I can't hold on for a few days." Fei Rue blinked and immediately knew that he was unnecessary. He glanced at Tang Yin's calm face and felt a little relieved. Then, he quickly bowed and left. Tang Yin did not ask him to stay. He also saw that Bosco seemed to want to say something to him. "Since it's only 10 miles, Captain Tang Yin, shall we walk there together?" Bosco still had that smile on his face, as if everything was not in his heart, but also as if everything was under his control. Tang Yin raised his eyebrows and looked into Bosco's eyes. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. "Okay, please." They were already close to the city, and the mountain road gradually widened. Most of the roads were flat grasslands with low hills occasionally. Tang Yin and Bosco left the team and walked on the grassland together, slanting towards the city. The crowd at the back gradually dispersed with the constant shouting of the scout. Then a few people or a dozen people walked towards Hanshui City every few minutes. After a while, 20 to 30 groups of people appeared intermittently on the road. They looked like ants from afar. Chapter 3:17. Perhaps it was because they were almost out of the 100,000 mountains the ubiquitous cold wind was extremely weak here, and the temperature had risen a lot. The grassland took this opportunity to glow with vitality. At a glance, it looked like a pleasing green carpet. Bosco was not in a hurry to speak. He seemed to think that the scenery here was good as he strolled to the mound not far away. Tang did not care. He habitually looked around and did not even try to guess Bosco's intentions. After a while on the top of the mound, looking into the distance, there was still an unchanging green. The scenery here is not bad. Bosco opened his mouth first, then turned around and asked, "What do you think?" "It is not bad." Tang nodded, looked into the distance casually, and sighed. It's a good place to bury people. It was rare for the cold wind to be calm, and the eye-catching green was abundant, but Tangan's regretful tone made it seem strange. Bosco raised his eyebrows and was stunned. He then shook his head with a smile. "Ha. People say that Captain Tang is murderous. Seeing it today, it is indeed true." "Excuse me, Minister." Tang touched his forehead and pretended to be embarrassed. It's completely a professional habit. Although it was a topic to start conversation, it was obviously not suitable for in-depth discussion. Bosco changed the topic and asked, "Captain Tang, do you have any plans to look for the place to purchase this time?" "It's not a plan, just some habitual methods." This was part of the job, so Tang naturally had to answer. He first shook his head, then spread out his hands. "These things can only be smuggled, so we have to find the secret black market. As for the secret black market, I will chat with a few local gang leaders and they will naturally tell me." Things like city defense equipment were undoubtedly prohibited items. However, the prohibition often represented huge profits, so naturally, there would be people who would take the risk to do it. However, the standard of the trading place might be higher. The black market in Levis City was obviously unlikely to exist, so they had to find a more hidden place. Although it's simple and direct, it's a good method. Bosco nodded in agreement. Although those low-class gang members were not very useful, they were indeed good at inquiring about information. Moreover, it was easy to get them to help. Just give them some money. Of course, with Tangan's killing intent, it was also a feasible method. Smuggling contraband. Bosco murmured with an ugly expression as if he was recalling something. Then, he walked down the mound and turned to Tangan. "Do you want to hear a story? It's about the decline of a family. If it's not too long and boring." Tangan shrugged and did not object. Then I'll put it simply. Bosco adjusted his expression and chuckled. "You should know that I used to be a noble, right, Viscount Elvis? No matter what noble family it is, as the head of the family, there's only one goal from birth, and that is to develop the family's power and raise the family status in their lifetime. If he really wasn't cut out for this, no matter how bad it was, he had to learn how to preserve what he had achieved so that his clan wouldn't fall into decline. In the past, I was a little too ambitious and wanted to raise the status of my family by a level in my generation." With a self-deprecating smile, Bosco continued, "Let's not talk about my attempts. In the end, I still chose to take the shortcut of smuggling. In fact, smuggling is a very normal thing in the noble circle. Everyone does it, so it's not surprising. It's just that I took a bigger risk. The things I smuggled were not contraband, just food. However, I painstakingly opened up a private route and sold the food to the Northern Wilderness tribes." TSK. Tangan heard this and couldn't help but smack his lips. He also praised Bosco's courage in his heart. The Northern Wilderness's thirst for food was imprinted in the bones of every barbarian in the Northern Wilderness, and it had been like this for hundreds of years. Because of geographical reasons, almost nothing could be grown in the Northern Wilderness, so they could only rely on robbery every time. Not to mention the war. The annual small-scale war was launched by the barbarians to rob food. As a result, the Bran Empire was naturally stricter on food. This Bosco dared to have such an idea and was able to pass through all the checkpoints. He was extremely daring. Isn't it a bit incredible? Bosco smiled and seemed to be a little complacent. In fact, my success was also inexplicable. The most difficult thing to smuggle in the Northern Wilderness is how to get through the border guarded by the Legion. I was also helpless at that time, but then I met a mysterious man in the border city. He was very capable and managed to get my food out. During that time, my family developed rapidly because of the food smuggling. At first, I was a little worried, but then I gradually became bolder. Then, haha, just like the higher a monkey climbs, the easier it is for you to see its butt. Because my family was too complacent, we were targeted by an earl. After a pause, he looked at Tang In and continued. You should be able to imagine that. Yes, he also wanted to participate. In fact, I didn't need to worry about him reporting me at that time because his family was not clean. But in the end, I still compromised and introduced him to the mysterious man. As a result, well, our family was reported and caught in the act. Only the Earl's family knew about this private channel. He was more ruthless. He directly ignored me and contacted the mysterious man. And at that time, I couldn't even report the Earl because it had become a revenge slander. At this point, Bosco shook his head and said with a self-deprecating expression, See, this is the advantage of strength. A Viscount is very careful, and an Earl is unrestrained. Huh. Oh, that's it? Although I don't want to say it, although it's not long, it's really not very interesting. Tang In spread out his hands in boredom. Bosco was stunned for a moment, and then quickly reacted, Captain Tang In, what's your purpose in joining the Gray Coat Army? To kill people. Tang In replied casually. Bosco was stunned again and smiled bitterly. Maybe I should ask, what do you think of the Gray Coat Army? This question again. Tang In frowned and said, If Bosco wants to say something, why don't you say it all at once? Okay. Bosco did not object and looked up into the distance. I'm very optimistic about the Gray Coat Army. It has the ability to directly change the rules. If my previous goal was to raise the level of my family, now that the whole family has become a fugitive, I have a greater chance of getting a position that I never thought of before. Sorry, I have to interrupt. Tang In nodded. I can probably understand what the minister means, but the Gray Coat Army is not like the Bran Empire. Even if the Gray Coat Army succeeds and you become a hero, it seems that you can't get that kind of position. Bosco's eyes flickered as he nodded his head in agreement. Then, he changed the topic. I heard that Captain Twain is very interested in fighting aura mantras recently. Well, my family has collected some of them. I can lend them to you for a look. TSK, the minister is very well informed. Bosco was telling the truth. Tang In did collect the cultivation method of fighting spirit recently in order to help the old butler explore the channel of fighting spirit as a reference. However, there are not many of these things in the Gray Coat Army. After some hard work, he only got a few, and they were all not popular. Yes, I do need these things, but can I take it that the minister is trying to bribe me? Tang In narrowed his eyes and said slowly. Bosco was surprised. Then he shook his head. Of course not. Hee. I really can't take out anything that can bribe Captain Tang In. These cultivation method of fighting spirit, well, just take it as compensation for some previous misunderstandings. So this is what he is waiting for. Tang In suddenly realized. If he guessed correctly, Bosco's idea was very simple, which was to make friends with him first. Although this sounded like making a mountain out of a molehill, Tang In and the Gray Space's current status in the Gray Coat Army was really worthy. Furthermore, Bosco's move could be considered to have put an end to the previous bullet matter. Furthermore, Tang In was soft-hearted. If the Bosco family were to do anything in the Gray Coat Army in the future, it would be inappropriate for Tang In to interfere. After understanding this point, Tang In looked into Bosco's eyes and shook his head gently. Although the minister's proposal is very tempting, I'm sorry. I can't forget the scene when I was being chased. I can't forget Angus's right leg that is still lying on the ground with a comminuted fracture. I also can't forget Felix's death in the tunnel. I will definitely investigate what should be investigated, and I will persist to the end. Finally, I would like to say something to the minister. It is best for people to stand with their heads held high, so that they will feel more comfortable. Once you lower your head, you are not far from kneeling down. Chapter 3:18. The first conversation on the grassland outside the city did not last long. 10 minutes later, Tang In and Bosco entered Hansui City and found the team that came in first. Generally speaking, The two of them did not get along. Of course, no matter what, they would not fall out with each other in public. After Bosco's slight probing was rejected, he skillfully changed the topic and talked about some geographical knowledge and other content. Tang and naturally wouldn't pursue the topic, so he also talked about some things. After that, the atmosphere between the two of them was very harmonious. As for whether the other party's heart was filled with resentment or deep resentment, it was naturally impossible to guess. Anyway, from Tangen's point of view, he was more wary of Bosco. This was a real old fox. Even if his mind was as deep as the sea, he was always calm on the surface. Intelligence and wisdom were not important to this kind of person, because experience was enough to let him make choices that were in line with his own interests every time. Although on the surface, Tangen was not interested in the history of the decline of the family that Bosco had mentioned before, how could he think that it was nonsense? In fact, these things could be regarded as Bosco's secret warning. He had shown his strong obsession with developing the family, and Tangen had intentionally or unintentionally blocked this development several times before. Later, his behavior of gifting the mental cultivation method of fighting for free could be regarded as a signal. Friend or foe, it was just a matter of a thought. Bosco had completed the means of using kindness and coercion in a few words that were not obvious. It could be said that when dealing with this kind of person, it was either to avoid dealing with him or not, or to kill him directly and not leave any future troubles. In terms of calculation, Tangen admitted that he was not as good as Bosco, who had lived for more than half of his life. It was even more impossible to avoid him. Since the establishment of the gray space, there had only been 2 casualties, which should also be thanks to the Bosco family. As mentioned just now, Tangen would not give up the investigation. Therefore, if it came to the point of a face-to-face conflict, Tangen was definitely inclined to the latter, which was to directly behead him. Of course, no matter how high the success rate of this action was, it was still too early to think about it now. It could only be regarded as a precaution. Hanshui City, one of the important cities in the north, was named after the Hanshui River that protected the city. Different from Riva City, Cold Water City didn't rely on ores or special crops to build up its economy. In fact, the reason this city was able to develop until now was entirely due to its geographical location. Hanshui City just so happened to be located on the northern hub line. It was bustling with traffic all day long. As such, the business and other situations were naturally spurred on. Gradually, this comprehensive large city was formed. When Tangen and Bosco arrived, the first thing they did was to find a place to stay. It was obviously inappropriate for such a large group of people to stay in a hotel. Fortunately, Josiah's secret organization had already covered Hanshui City. With their help, finding a place to stay would not be a problem. Not long after, the scout brought back an ordinary-looking middle-aged man in green. Under the cover of the surrounding crowd, the middle-aged man in green hurriedly walked towards Bosco and bowed. "Greetings, Minister. I'm Burnell, the head of the secret agency in Hanshui City. I've been waiting for you for a long time." Tangen sized up Bunnier from the side and couldn't help but nod. There were still some differences between urban and rural civilians. Those who were observant could tell at a glance. For example, some shop assistants would also have some judgments in their hearts after observing the customers for a while. This Bunnier did a good job. He completely looked like a small-town citizen. After greeting each other, Burnell looked at the crowded city gate and said in a low voice, "Minister, the place has been arranged. It's all deserted houses and won't attract attention." Bosco nodded and said in a deep voice, "Very good. Now take us there to have a look." The group was still the same as before. They were divided into small groups about 10 meters apart and moved forward. There were dozens of scouts scattered in the crowd to provide support. The city was naturally different from the unrestrained mountains. Since the secret agency had already covered Hanshui City, the usual propaganda work was also carried out. During this period, although the official newspaper was no longer fighting, the city's garrison force had not relaxed their determination to dig out the propaganda personnel of the Gray Coat Army. Under Burnell's lead, the group turned into a remote path and passed through a few slums. The further they went, the fewer people there were. Finally, they stopped at a corner of the South City District. A nearly deserted street appeared in front of them. This is Blackstone Street. It used to be occupied by a gang. After being encircled and suppressed, it became deserted. In addition, there are rumors of demolition, so no one lives here except for a few homeless people. We have cleared out a few big houses in front. They're all the living necessities inside. Minister, what do you think of living here? Tangen looked around, and there were indeed no signs of human activity. Although Hansui City was prosperous, the existence of such slums and deserted streets was expected, just like how the sun couldn't shine on the corners of the walls. Because they had been notified in advance, Burnell was fully prepared. After looking around for a while, the group moved into the houses. If there were no accidents, they would probably stay here for the next few days. There were actually very few people involved in the purchase. Most of them were responsible for transportation and protection. After settling down, Burnell brought a thick stack of information for Bosco and the others to read. Most of it was information about Hansui City. After all, someone had to go out. It was impossible to not know anything about the city. In this procurement team, Bosco was naturally the highest-ranking officer. He had a group of people who were similar to staff officers. Then, there were people who assisted from the side, such as Fei Rue, who was from the military logistics department. As for Tang Yin, he did not have a fixed duty. His mission was to find the secret black market and get in touch with it. Tang Yin first squinted at the simple map of Hansui City and then found Burnell, who was very busy. Bernie had originally come from the outpost. Although he had not met Tang Yin face-to-face, he had naturally heard some of the rumors, both positive and negative. He did not dare to neglect and quickly bowed. Captain Tang Yin, what can I do for you? Haha, Brother Burnell, you don't have to be so polite. I just want to ask some questions about Hansui City. Tang Yin returned the bow and chuckled softly. Perhaps because he had heard too much negative news, Burnell still seemed a little reserved. He said politely, "No problem, Captain Tang Yin, please ask." Well, do you know where the black market of Hansui City is? Burnell secretly breathed a sigh of relief and said without hesitation, "Yes, it's in Malu Alley in the west of the city." Malu Alley. Tang Yin nodded thoughtfully and then continued. Can you give me a brief introduction of the gangs in the city? Well, just tell me the name, scale, and location. Captain Tang Yin, why don't I go back and sort it out and send it to you? This is a little too much. Burnell hesitated and said carefully, Haha, thank you for your kindness. Well, I have a good memory. Brother Burnell, just tell me. Tang Yin looked at Burnell's expression and instantly understood his intention. He shook his head and chuckled. Well, okay. He probably felt that Tang and was not as eccentric and ruthless as the rumors said. Burnell's expression gradually relaxed and was replaced by a kind of confidence. He described the gangs in the city from big to small in detail. Although he didn't have the strength of Do Chi, Burnell was indeed a rare talent. It could be seen that he had indeed put in a lot of effort. The complicated gangs in the city were very organized, in his words. Some of the large gangs were very detailed, but not cumbersome. Every sentence was to the point. While listening, Tang Yin pinched his chin. He actually had the idea of poaching Burnell. After the expansion of the gray space, various functions gradually appeared. But overall, there were more people who fought. Some of the work of analysis and sorting out information was basically done by Tang Yin and Michaud. But after thinking that this was Josiah's man, Tang Yin sighed and had to give up. The above is a medium-sized gang. Next is a small gang, the Brotherhood. The number of people is about. Ahem. Tang Yin cleared his throat and waved his hand. Thank you. You don't have to talk about the small gangs. Those secret black markets were difficult to come into contact with unless one was at a certain level. Burnell immediately stopped talking. He then looked at his subordinate who had just appeared and was now standing not far away. He turned his head and said, Captain Tang Yin, do you have any other questions? Oh no. Thank you, Big Brother Burnell. Tang Yin simply bowed to show his gratitude. Then he had an idea and asked casually, By the way, is there a shop of the Yatong Chamber of Commerce in the city? Burnell was stunned and replied, yes. It's in the center of the city. Tang In nodded. Well, then I won't bother you anymore. Captain Tang In, you're welcome. I'll go do my work. After saying goodbye to Burnell, Tang In turned the ring on his left little finger and walked back. There was no reason for Alan's Yadong Chamber of Commerce to miss out on a comprehensive city like Hanshui City. Tang In had planned to go there when he set off from the encampment and replenish his dry wallet. He had just asked casually, but judging from Burnell's unhesitant reaction, the shop in the city must be quite famous. With such thoughts in mind, Tang In walked toward the big house where Bosco was. After all, they were a team. Tang In naturally couldn't leave without saying a word. He still had to greet them. Just as he turned the corner, Tang In raised his eyebrows. Fei Rui? Fei Rui, who was walking toward him, suddenly looked up and almost dropped the water bottle in his hand. The gloominess on his face was replaced by shock. Huh, Tang In, don't you make any sound when you walk? That's true. Tang In shrugged. Fei Rui opened his mouth and was speechless. What's wrong? You look like your soul has left your body. Tang In patted Fei Rui's shoulder and asked curiously, shouldn't you be in the house discussing the purchase plan? Why did you come out? Yes. Fei Rui shook the water bottle in his hand and smiled self-deprecatingly. Tang In thought quickly and frowned. What's wrong? Are you looking down on me? Anyone could do something as trivial as fetching water. However, they were busy with purchasing, so it wasn't Fei Rui's turn to do it. The truth was more or less the same. Fei Rui's status was the lowest in this group, so his words carried little weight. Moreover, Fei Rui's spot had been obtained by Tang In. This was an opportunity to gain credit and glory, so those who joined later would definitely not like it. I'm not looking down on you. Don't do anything rash. Fei Rui quickly waved his hand when he saw Tang In's expression. Trust me, I'll take care of it. Tang In thought for a while and nodded. It wasn't appropriate for him to interfere in this kind of matter. Otherwise, it might cause the opposite effect. Furthermore, Tang In had confidence in Fei Rui, not to mention his talent in numbers and operations. Just from his intelligent personality and his ability to conduct himself, the current situation should be a small problem. Don't worry with my abilities. There's nothing I can't handle. Whoosh bang. Crash. Fei Rui probably wanted to show that he didn't care and that it was a piece of cake. He waved his hand coolly and the water bottle flew out and fell happily. Ahem, the after effects of riding a horse. Yes, it must be. I haven't recovered yet. Brother, when did you ride a horse and use the whip? Chapter 319. In the afternoon, at the central square of Hanshui City. Cities in this alternate world seem to like building a square in the center to display the city's symbolic items and connect the various main roads. Putting aside whether the design was reasonable or not, one obvious effect was that the central square would always be crowded at any time of the day. Lots of people. Other than being crowded, a lot of people also meant business opportunities. There is no doubt that the shops in the central square were always the most profitable. Therefore, every business family was racking their brains to own a piece of land here. Apart from the profits, there was another more important reason for doing so. One had to know that opening a shop here was not only a symbol of wealth, but also a symbol of status. Since it was so important, needless to say, a piece of land here was hard to come by. That was indeed the case. However, in the east of the central square, there was a 3-story pavilion standing tall. Not to mention how magnificent its appearance was. Just the fact that it was several times larger than the neighboring shops was enough to instantly kill thousands of shocked, envious, and hateful gazes. It also made people involuntarily smell the thick scent of gold coins. At this moment, there was indeed a young man in front of the pavilion who was shocked. He stared at the sign that was made of pure gold, Yatong Shop. His eyes were dull, and his body was stiff. His reaction was noticed by others. Coupled with his ordinary clothes made of coarse cloth, it was obvious that he was a country bumpkin who had never seen the world. In fact, many people who went in and out of the shop had the same thought. They often felt a sense of superiority. However, what they didn't know was that the young man didn't feel envious at all. Instead, he felt ecstatic as if he was struck by a windfall. That's right. This person was Tang Yin. Judging from the contract, he was the real owner of the shop. What the F***CK? Coming back to his senses, Tang Yin enunciated each word clearly to express his surprise. That's right. Tang Yin knew that the Yatong Chamber of Commerce should be very profitable. This could be seen from the attitude of the nobles in Levis City toward Allen. However, that was only an illusory guess after all. It was not until he faced this domineering three-story pavilion in the city that Tang Yin truly felt the enormous wealth within it. No wonder Bernie had answered so straightforwardly. It would be strange if people didn't remember this shop standing in this position all day long. Tang Yin rubbed his chin and admired the Yatong shop's golden signboard again. He sighed in his heart. He was going to be rich. There was nothing else he wanted in life. Hiss, Tang Yin instinctively dodged to the side when he heard the neigh of a horse. Turning his head to look, he saw a rather extravagant carriage stop where he was standing a moment ago. The coachman's face was filled with shock as he tightened the reins, trying his best to stop the carriage from rushing forward. Fortunately, the horses were very good. Under the efforts of the coachman, they quickly stopped. Phew! Are you deaf? What are you standing there in a daze for? You didn't even hear me when I called out to you. Do you think you can afford to pay for the damage to the carriage? The coachman turned around and let out a long sigh. Tang Yin rubbed his nose. He had been staring at the Yatong shop's signboard in a daze just now and had not heard the shouting at all. However, they were still in front of the shop and not on the road. The carriage door opened, and a young woman with heavy makeup appeared. Her expression was somewhat unpleasant. What's going on? The coachman was a little frightened. He immediately pointed at Tang Yin and told him what had happened just now. With Tang Yin's hearing, he naturally heard the embellishment. However, he was in a good mood and did not intend to argue. He simply bowed and apologized. Sorry, I was distracted and did not hear you shouting. Please forgive me. The beautiful woman glanced at Tang Yin and frowned. Then, she looked at the Yatong Chamber of Commerce that was close by and said impatiently, Sigh, forget it. What bad luck? Just leaving the house brings bad luck. Although the carriage door closed, the faint sound of bumping into a country bumpkin could still be heard from behind. Then, the deep voice of a man could be heard. It sounded like he was comforting him. Consider yourself lucky, kid. The coachman looked at Tang Yin disdainfully and then slowly drove the carriage to the side. Judging by the way he was driving, it seemed like he was going to stop there as well. Tang Yin shook his head and did not take it to heart. He strode into the shop. Although the Yatong Chamber of Commerce had made a fortune by relying on washing machines, a shop naturally did not sell only one type of product. Therefore, the first floor was filled with a dazzling array of products. Everything was available. Generally speaking, they were all lifestyle items, and their quality was not low. Tang Yin was not in a hurry to find the person in charge here. He planned to walk around the shop first. Walking around as the owner. Just the thought of it made him feel good. There were many customers in the shop, and it seemed very busy. Therefore, when Tang Yin came in, there were no extra attendants to welcome him and introduce him. However, if one were to ask where the most people were, it would undoubtedly be the Eastern District. That area was filled with neatly arranged washing machines. It was a spectacular sight. They're all mine. They're all money. Tang Yin touched the raccoon logo on the washing machine and almost drooled. Wow, there are so many people here. The coy voice was very pretentious and made one's hair stand on end. Of course, this is the Yatong Chamber of Commerce. The deep voice of man sounded very envious. If my business group could be half of this, no, even 1/10 of this scale, I'd be satisfied. Yes, my dear, you'll definitely do it. I hope so. If this meeting is successful and we get the right to sell 500 washing machines. Forget it. Let's not talk about that for now. Let's take a look at the washing machines. Haven't you been clamoring to buy them? Okay. You don't know how cold the water is now, and it hurts your hands. Aren't there servants washing the clothes? But everyone else has a washing machine. Tang Yin's ears twitched. The voice sounded familiar. He turned to look and saw the gorgeous woman from before hugging a fat, middle-aged man who looked like a wealthy businessman. She was constantly acting coquettishly. Tang In felt a chill run down his spine when he saw the woman's age and body shape. The gorgeous woman probably felt his gaze and turned around. She frowned when she saw Tang In. She rolled her eyes and fanned her nose. She continued to act coquettishly. "My dear, let's go to the second floor. These are all ordinary washing machines. Also, there are all kinds of people here. You can even smell the dirt. It's really unbearable." Huh? The wealthy businessman was taken aback and hesitated. There was a huge difference in price between an ordinary washing machine and a high-end one. High-end washing machines were usually marketed to the nobility, such as the one that Philip had. "Hurry up and take me there." "Ugh, you only accompany me for 10 days a year, and you still won't agree to my request." "You." The gorgeous woman was good at acting. Her previous anxious expression instantly turned into one that looked like she was about to cry. The wealthy businessman obviously fell for this trick. As a man, how could he refuse his woman's request? He took her by the arm and said domineeringly, "Let's go to the second floor." "Yeah, I love you the most, my dear." In just a second, the tears in her eyes magically disappeared. The gorgeous woman grabbed the wealthy businessman's arm and smiled again. Then, she walked to the stairs inside. When she turned around, she didn't forget to give Tang In a look of disdain. Tang In touched his nose and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Did I provoke you? Isn't it just wearing shabby clothes? Do you have to look for a sense of superiority over me? But then again, this rhythm is a little familiar." Tang In rubbed his chin. "Yes. Isn't this the scene of the protagonist pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger in the modern world? TSK. This is the rhythm of showing off. Wah." It had to be said that the prosperity of the Yatong shop in front of him made Tang Un's owner feel a little proud. The gorgeous woman's actions didn't anger him. Instead, it made him fall into a fantasy. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.